Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto trained by Jiraya summoned for Chunin exams Naruto Harem Part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this and comment for next part. And now let's start the fanfic. Shukaku. Gaara rasped, his voice broken and distant. Wide, bloodshot eyes outlined by deep and heavy circles met Naruto's own, and it was hard to believe this was the same stare that had crippled Lee. What? The boy continued. A tiny raccoon, lost and shaking in the middle of a desert storm. Where is Shukaku? I can't hear it, I can't. Gaara. Both Naruto and Gaara turned to the voice. Temari and Kankuro slid down the newly formed dunes to stop meters from the two. Gaara shuffled, his arms and legs pulling him back as his eyes met his siblings. For their part, Kankuro and Temari seemed just as lost. Gaara. Temari was the first to extend, first to reach out. Maybe it was the older sister in her, but the desperate claw in her mind to stay away gnawed at her throat. For the first time in her whole life, she felt like she could see Gaara's eyes. Mari. His voice wavered and the world seemed to spin. Kuro. Temari said nothing, but her heart made its own decisions. One step at a time, she approached. Each step pressing into sand, her mind calculated the thousands of ways for Gaara's all-present, ever-consuming protection to grab her. Pull her down and just keep pulling until everything was dark and she was breathing dirt. Another step forward, the sand never moved. Temari. Kankuro warned, but it was half-hearted and distant. His mind felt the same pull, the same hesitation, but he was always the cautious one. He didn't start moving until Temari had collapsed to her knees in the sand, just outside Gaara's reach. Her hand reached out, and it occurred to her this was the closest to Gaara she had ever been. Gaara, she whispered. Her hand was so close. When her skin finally met the boy's face, his body went stiff at the touch. Temari held up another hand, cupping the opposite side of Gaara's face as he stared, frozen in shock. Gaara, she whispered, words turning into tears, turning into total collapse of her everything. Gaara. She repeated his name like it was the first time she'd ever said it, and by the time Kankuro made it to the two he's crying as well. Both sets of arms wrap around Gaara's frame and the boy can do nothing but stare and shake. We thought. Kankuro sobbed. We thought you were gone. Temari said nothing, repeating her brother's name as her arms wrap around his frame. From beside the scene, Naruto gave a hacking cough. Gentle hugs, he suggested, his own ribs seeming to experience the pain through pure proximity. That fall hurt like hell. The blonde's comments were ignored, but Gaara recovered enough from the exhaustion and shock to mumble a question. What, he began, has happened? The words, even saying them, left Gaara breathless. His whole life, every moment and every waking hell, spent alongside the howling and wailing of a half-captured monster. Whispering and screaming and threatening to kill any and everything he ever loved if he fell asleep. It was constant. It was all-consuming. It's gone. Gaara said. The silence in his mind left a booming echo that shook his soul. I can't hear it. Temari reeled, face a cascade of hope and relief and tears. You're here, she whispered. Gaara could barely process. It was gone. It was gone, and his sister, who he had never held in his life, was wrapped around him like he'd collapse into sand if she let go, and saying that he was here. My existence. Gaara shook. My existence was buried by Shukaku. Kankuro gave a racking cough, shaking his head so hard his hood fell back and buried his head into his brother's. Not buried, Gaara. You're safe, now. Safe. Did he even know what that word meant? There was a moment of quiet and still, an image of two arms and a brown-haired woman wrapped around Gaara's body. Safe. He buried his head forward, and the sand parted. By the time Gaara tilted his head to gaze to the left, Naruto had risen to his feet and was shakily standing. How? He asked. Naruto wheezed, giving a mild shrug and trying to be cool, but the wheeze turned into a hacking cough of blood and sand. It's a really long story, dude. he said. It was both the truth, and he felt like he had a bruised rib and it hurt to say anything. I cut a deal with your brother and sister. Once I find my sensei, we can talk. He knows how to make what I did permanent. Gaara said nothing, but his head nodded, as though any of this made sense at all. Temari turned her head, eyes red with tears and refusing to let go of her brother. Thank you, she whispered. Naruto smirked, but it reached well beyond his eyes and spread a warmth even through his aching bones. We followed the plan. He smiled, but a memory pulled at the line on his lips. Turning to Gaara, he took a rattled step forward. I know this is a lot for you all, he said to the trio. No sand leapt to attack him, but Gaara's blank and confused gaze left Naruto anxious, unable to read the meaning. But I need to find my team. Pink hair and blue shirt. Do you know where they are? Looking more pointedly at the still shell-shocked Jinchuriki, Naruto gulped. He was supposed to be your opponent. Gaara blinked, shaking his head. I never fought, he answered. Naruto's concern morphed to confusion. Never fought. Disqualified. Kankuro added between trying to find his voice again. The Uchiha showed late and the attack started early. There was a race of emotions crossing Naruto's face, but chief among them were that Sasuke hadn't fought the literal demon and that meant he and Sakura were somewhere back at the stadium. You didn't fight, Naruto repeated, excitement and hope arcing like lightning through his voice. Then, I still have time. He wasn't too late. They hadn't fought Gaara and it wasn't too late and he could still do something. Now all he had to do was get back to the stadium and find them. If he could just muster the strength to. It was like a gong. Like a silent gong ringing throughout the hairs on Naruto's back surged, a single pulse echoing through his mind. What? He whispered, turning from the sand trio and gazing back to the city. He could feel it, like a single needle pushed into the back. A signal, a beacon, a call, the Hirishin. It wasn't something Naruto could describe, and Jiraiya had told him to just stop trying, but when the Hirishin seal was active and within range, Naruto could feel it. Like closing your eyes and walking through the house he'd lived in his entire life. He knew exactly where the pulse was coming from and could feel it calling out, ready to receive. There was only one problem. Naruto looked down into the nearby sand, the only shimmer being the hilt of his last Hirishin kunai, lying in the sand only meters away. This wasn't right. Naruto picked up the blade, ignoring the burning pain in his movement. He could feel the call. Far away. Up high. Not here. Jiraiya. He wondered, but the pulse didn't respond. It just hummed, like a ring in the back of his head only he could hear. It had to be Jiraiya, calling him or checking on him. Maybe he had found Sasuke and Sakura. Maybe all of this was over and he could just go to Ichiraku and relax. The pulse hit him again, and his gut twisted. This was wrong. Something was. There was a blinding yellow flash, and Naruto was gone. He wasn't flying through the air, but Naruto didn't land on his feet when he reappeared. Pain and impact, blood, blonde, and orange skidded into existence against a semi-collapsed roof. Tiles shattered and clattered like glass as the blonde rolled, only just digging a hand into the tile to slow his roll before he reached the edge. Naruto's eyes flared open to look around only to see. Purple. The words left his mouth and something pulled. A coil of rope that slithered bound his ankles and arms before he could process what was happening. What the hell? Naruto squirmed against the bond, but whatever was wrapping him felt like fighting steel. What the? Naruto cried out as he was lifted, suspended in air by serpentine bonds. There was a blur, a white shimmer, and a figure appeared next to him as though from air. Well. The dark chill that sunk into his ears made his blood turn to stone. A fear, like an anchor tied to your foot and throwing it overboard, took hold. Naruto Uzumaki, in the flesh. Slitted eyes leered, piercing. The voice was like honey and poison. There was a pressure pushing down on him, a force. It wasn't the all-encompassing, raging storm that the Aikibi's presence had leveled. This one was smaller but so much more pointed. So much more focused. If Gaara possessed was an avalanche, this was an icicle already pushed against your throat. Naruto felt like he'd forgotten how to breathe. When Kabuto shared that he had made the most interesting acquaintance before the exams, imagine my surprise when it turned out to be you. The words twisted in the air, like oil spilling through a placid lake. Naruto's mouth opened and closed, but only a crackle of dry air escaped. The black-haired ninja, like a twisted version of that Stang attacker from the Forbidden Forest. Who? Naruto rasped. Are you? The figure smiled like poison felt. Yellow-slitted eyes and pale white skin. He continued without answering. The forest, of course. A taste of your rather curious abilities. The figure raised a single eyebrow. From the looks of it, you didn't care for my parting gift. A cackle. But then you arrive in the arena and, pale hands trace an elaborate path through air as the Sannin bent, deftly swiping a three-pronged kunai from the ground. And now this. The man's laugh was dark and hollow, but filled with such a tangible hate it coiled like moisture in the air and stuck to Naruto's skin like sweat. Naruto watched as the man gripped the kunai. His hand paled, squeezing the metal knife so tight his fingers shook. Naruto couldn't even follow the hand signs, but a stream of fire erupted from their mouth and engulfed the kunai. Steel and fabric glowed in the heat, wobbling and wavering and melting in a steaming puddle of molten metal to the ground. You can't possibly know, Naruto-kun. The ninja was almost whimsical. Amused. A snake coiling around a mouse. How deep the water beneath your feet is. Orochimaru. Naruto's eyes flew open as a second figure shambled out of a nearby crater. Blood and black cloth draping off his body, Hiruzen Sarutobi stumbled forward with a broken hand covering a hole in his lower torso. Get the hell away from him. Old man. Naruto's blood boiling from ice to fire and back. The Hokage's presence was so diminished, so broken, it was like nothing the boy had ever seen. With his lone free hand, the cage blasted through hand signs faster than Naruto had ever seen. Pillars of earth erupted from the roof, eruptions of mud and rock. With a speed Naruto could barely follow, they blasted towards the snake Sannin. Orochimaru. The betrayer. Naruto hadn't been a good student, but stories of the Sannin were like comic books. He knew all the characters. All the heroes. All the villains. Orochimaru's body broke, twisting and contorting like a corpse as he dodged each projectile. The only thing Naruto could see was the smirk that never left the Sannin's face. Even on death's door, such ferocity, sensei. Orochimaru's hands flashed, and the ground near Hiruzen rumbled. But you're getting sloppy. The holes where the pillars of earth had erupted shimmered and expanded, a pool of mud and water coiling along the rooftop beneath the Hokage's feet. Hiruzen crouched to jump away, but Orochimaru was above him like a missile. A kick crashed into the Hokage's guard like a meteor, and the roof buckled under the strain. Steel and mud and debris exploded through the area as a crater formed 2 stories deep. Old man. Naruto cried, as helpless as before. Hiruzen was pinned, body pressed and bleeding beneath beams and rubble. From above the crater, Orochimaru gave a laugh. It felt like spit. Turning back to Naruto, the Sannin waved his hand, fingers trailing in the breeze. It felt like cold sandpaper against his skin as the prison squirmed, thousands of snakes moving in unison as the blonde was dragged closer to the crater. Naruto. The snake said, and Naruto hated the way his own name sounded. I'm actually so glad you could join us. Orochimaru's eyes turned to the crater, and Hiruzen squirmed beneath the rubble. There's someone that I'd like for you to meet. Don't do this. The cage rumbled, pleading. Don't do this, Orochimaru. The snake Sannin didn't respond, only giving a vague wave as he pulled yet another Hiruzen kunai from his robes. Tell me, child. Orochimaru twisted the blade between his fingers. A cold pounding, like drums and thunder and promises of pain, started echoing behind Naruto's ears. Have you ever wanted to meet the 4th Hokage? There was a blinding flash. Tattered white cloak swaying in the wind. The man before him crumbled and shifted, a constant state of decay and repair. His eyes were blank, hollow, but the tufts of blonde hair swaying across his brow was like looking in a mirror. Naruto's body shook. Orochimaru drank in the fear-like wine. Uzumaki Naruto. Orochimaru bent, a mocking bow. I'd like you to meet the fourth Hokage. Naruto barely processed as the bonds around him loosened. His eyes were transfixed. His feet slid back to the floor with a slump, legs so numb it didn't even register. Orochimaru stepped behind the blonde, a slender hand sliding against Naruto's shoulders. Never met and yet, the apprentice gave a pointed glare to his bleeding, broken teacher. I think you might find you have so much in common. Naruto tried to run, to scream. Nothing. He couldn't take his eyes off the face, greeting lifeless eyes with a white-hot tremor. The man's lips didn't move, no indication of life. Yes, the resemblance is just uncanny, isn't it? Orochimaru was almost cackling, like staring into a mirror. What a peculiar thing, for two supposed strangers to favor so much. A wicked grin. Familiar, in every sense of the word, don't you think? The crumbling man shook. His foot inched, crept and shambled as his legs pushed forward. Naruto was frozen. In truth, it pains me to end this reunion. Orochimaru lamented. So many years missed, so much lost time. The Sannin's eyes rolled back to the Hokage as Hiruzen attempted to struggle to his feet. Another one of your secrets leading to a tragic outcome, sensei. He hissed. How terribly fitting. Orochi, Hiruzen wheezed. The cage's mind screamed and shouted for his arms to move, to do anything, but the nerves and bones fell silent. You can't. Don't do this. He doesn't deserve. Orochimaru spat. The man's presence seemed to swell, arrogance and pride giving way to a wave of hatred that flooded the clearing. You would presume to know what other people deserve, wouldn't you? The shambling man took another step. Naruto's body refused to move. Unblinking eyes stared into blue, and a decaying hand reached and wrapped itself around the genin's neck. But I'm afraid there's no time for moral lessons, today. No sooner had the Sannin's rage appeared, it receded, the momentary lapse giving way to cold commands. The fourth Hokage, Namikaze Minato. Orochimaru's eyes flashed as he ordered. Kill your son. Recognition. Understanding. Confusion. Horror. Each passed through and left Naruto as immobile as if his arms had been buried and dried in cement. The fourth Hokage's hand lunged, and Naruto didn't try and dodge. He couldn't move at all. All he could do was stare, transfixed, in the blue eyes of Namikaze Minato's features shuddered. His hand stopped a breath from Naruto's neck. The body choked, like speaking through drowning. Minato's grip neither loosened nor tightened, but his arm shook as the man fought words on his lips. No. Naruto's throat went dry, the man's voice echoing through his mind. My. Orochimaru cackled, raising an eyebrow in almost amusement. A will so strong, it defies me even in death. Naruto just stared. Minato's eyes didn't shift or his face change, but his hand continued to tremble. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed, a complex calculus flashing behind face as he witnessed the struggle. Now this is something truly unexpected, he said. His voice was clinical, the scientist within unable to overlook the anomaly. An Edo Tensei bond, even without a soul. Orochimaru approached the duo, eyeing the homage with a mixture of fascination and annoyance. This is quite unexpected. With a cold and calculated precision, Orochimaru's eyes roamed around the walking corpse. This shouldn't even be possible. The body is here, but your poor father's soul is still trapped in the belly of the death god. The scientist disappeared. The monster returned, scowling. Sickening. His eyes met Naruto's. You do know your father's in eternal torment, don't you? With the same callous apathy, the scientist returned. But the Shinigami isn't as picky on bodies, so I managed to make a deal to let just his body out. Orochimaru took a kunai, slowly pressing it into the side of the Hokage's skull. There was no blood, no flinch or even blink as the blade was buried in the man's skull. When he released the blade, it slid out of the gaping hole without a sound. Naruto watched, eyes wide as the wound shifted and ruffled like peeling paint. Not quite healing, but disappearing into shifting skin. And yet here his body stands, acting like it has a soul. Orochimaru made a low clicking sound and shook his head. That simply won't do. Naruto-kun. The snake called. It seems I must thank you again for this most fascinating new information. I never imagined such a reaction could occur, but clearly improvements are required. The mad Sanin rolled his shoulders with a careless sigh. But, alas, there just isn't time. He announced, taking a step forward and reaching across to his hip. I'll just kill you, burn Konoha to the ground, and then I'll pull your fathers out of death for real and see what's going on. In a flourish, the Kusanagi was drawn. Cold steel shimmered as it slid through the air, whined through clearings. The Sanin's arm shifted, and the blade raised above Naruto's head, pointing directly into his neck. Naruto didn't even notice. All he could do was stare into the eyes before him as they stared, empty, back. Goodbye, Uzumaki Naruto. Boom. An explosion, deep and raw and loud, swept through the clearing. The Sanin's blade steadied as his eyes snapped to the left. The purple of the barrier shimmered, a prismatic rainbow as it shuddered at the blow. Again. Boom. This time, Orochimaru shifted. Flowing like a wave, his stance turned to face a single point in the barrier wall. A crack, hairline and stretching had erupted from the light. Boom. Kid. It was only the combo, a voice and a thunder that snapped Naruto's attention from the body trapping him. Arrow Sennin. He rasped. His hands clawed up and into the hand around his neck. Naruto pulled at the grip, but it was like scraping at a steel chain. The scroll. Jiraya roared, glowing with a chakra aura Naruto had never seen before as he slammed another fist into the barrier. It was like the trees were breathing. Like every strike Jiraiya levied at the wall had the weight of the forest itself. The resounding gong shook the field, and Orochimaru surged towards the weakening border. Two birds, he snarled as the snake prepared to fight the new intrusion. Use the scroll, Naruto. Nah. The blonde's body went still, his eyes shifting like sand to the voice. Nah. The animated body of the fourth Hokage whispered. His voice was lost. So lost but so desperate to find. Naruto. The scroll tumbled, slipping through the genin's fingers and clattered to the ground. There was an eruption of smoke, like a firecracker, and a massive blob of hair. Razor-sharp spines of hair punctured the husk of the fourth Hokage with so much force his body was sent flying into the nearby buildings. Naruto collapsed, gasping at the sudden return of air to his lungs. You all right? Jiraya's voice asked, but Naruto was too busy heaving into the dirt. He raised a weary look, exhaustion, confusion, pain. Jiraya's lips hardened to a single line. We'll talk more later. The man said, but Naruto's vision was starting to blur. The sudden rush of oxygen and movement. The world started shifting, fading in and out of color. Sensei, his voice a whisper. Was that my? But the question never came. Naruto's vision blurred, and his body collapsed in its next step. Do you recall my order? It was the way the words echoed through the room. Lingered and cracked like vines through a forest floor. Deep demands echoing inside a chamber of darkness and stone. Because I do. The commandment continued. That I am to be made aware of all activities between Jiraiya and the child. A wooden cane scraped along the stone floor, rattling before the ragged body of a masked and faceless shinobi. Beaten, bloody, and barely breathing. Danzo Shimura scowled. Did you forget this simple directive? There was a gurgle, likely blood, that pooled behind a frog mask. The shinobi trembled, their bodies straining to maintain the weight beneath wavering arms. No, Danzo-sama. Frog shuddered. We didn't. And yet, Danzo continued as though the creature before him had not spoken. Creatures did not speak, after all. Not only is Jiraiya able to continue another month unmonitored, he manages to find time to teach the Kyuubi Jinchuriki the Hiroshin no Jutsu. Danzo's cane shimmered and glinted in the dark. The stick parted, and the shining fang of a blade emerged from hollowed wood. The nearby torchlight danced for but a moment, before the blade plunged into the stone floor. Frog's right hand happened to be in the way. The sword went through that, too. MHHFF. The scream muffled against blood and restraint, but Danzo's lone eye simmered in the darkness. Do you have anything to say for yourself? The ninja writhed, hand pinned and body shaking. Sweat poured down his body and bowed head, leaving damp smears of water and blood. We did not approach closer so as to not alert Jiraya-sama to our presence. We, Commander. Danzo snapped, his head tilting. Are failures so easily shared? No, Danzo-sama. The frog corrected. My decision is my failure. Danzo twisted his cane. Frog whimpered. Your failure, indeed. He agreed, lone eyes shifting up and into the surrounding darkness. A chorus of blank masks surrounded the display. Danzo spoke to the Embly. Your failure that you have wrought on your village. On your family. A failure that root cannot abide, or else the future of this village will be naught but ash and misery. There was a wet squelch as Danzo ripped his blade from the floor. He held it forward, scanning the point among the dozens of surrounding figures. Failure is weakness, Danzo declared, his voice rising and drowning out the labored breathing of Frog. Weakness is decay. Decay is treason. Burn it. The faceless ones replied, all but a whisper. Quiet alone, but together heard. One voice, one answer, chanting in the darkness. The tree must be nurtured. Danzo continued his sermon. Must be protected. There will be those unwilling to do what is necessary. To give what is required. Burn them. It was louder this time. Larger. There will be those who would take from the tree. Surrounding the tree. Feeding off its strength and its future. They are parasites. Weeds. Burn them. From around the circle, torchlights erupted. Dozens of fires flickered into existence. A cavern system of rock and roots, now illuminated by dozens and dozens of torchlights chanting. The garden must be tended. These elements must be cleansed. Weeds must be pulled. Parasites must be destroyed. Burn them. Danzo's voice was shouting, now. Disappointment and restraint roaring into a blaze of fury. The chorus followed their leader. And if the gardeners are found weak, if they find failure, then they have become decay. They have become the disease that chokes and kills the tree. Danzo's cane cracked against the stone, and silence flooded the cavern once more. A lone figure, face obscured in a blank and empty mask, stepped forward from the crowd carrying a bucket. It looked silently to its master, but Danzo turned his gaze only down the bleeding frog. Crouching low, Danzo reached forward and pulled the frog mask from the shinobi's face. Brown hair was matted and torn, clots of blood and bruise mixing like watercolors across the nameless boy's face. With what swollen vision remained, the young man met his master's single-eyed gaze and gave a shudder against pain. What is the cure to the disease that kills the tree? Danzo asked. There was a moment, fleeting and instinctual, where the boy's body spasmed. Lesions and scars oozing on his skin rattled and his body seemed just moments from collapsing. But as he met his master's steeled gaze, a sudden calm flushed across Frog's battered body. He gave a pained but deep inhale, rising his back with the last of his strength and meeting the gaze without question. Burn them, Frog answered, and the chorus of faceless ninja replied in kind. As they chanted and echoed his words, burn them. Burn them. The ninja holding the container stepped, spilling the bucket forward. Brown liquid like sap oozed, and blood and bruise were replaced by viscous flow. Danzo nodded as the pour finished, not moving until the final drop had left Frog covered in the substance. Rising to his feet, he gave a nod. Very well, he called out, motioning forth a second faceless mask. This one carried a single torch. Then I commend you this final directive. Blood and oil and shame. Shame. Failure is weakness. Danzo shifted, his cane bashing against the ground. Weakness is treason. Burn them. The chorus answered. Another slam of the cane. When we find parasites in the tree, we remove them. Disease, we remove it. Failure, we excise it. Danzo's arm extended, and an unlit torch was placed between his palm by a faceless one. His fingers curled around the wood. We are the fire that keeps the forest clean. Danzo shuffled back, his footsteps ending at the edge of pooling oil and blood. The gardener in the dark who ensures the future of the hidden leaf. No hand signs. No words. Danzo's lone eye flashed red, and small pillar of fire erupted from his tongue. The unlit torch burst into a blazing crackle. A single black eye met the wavering brown of the unmasked frog. Danzo extended his arm, torch ablaze. For the hidden leaf. Danzo's voice echoed. Frog's eyes reflected only the flicker and crackle of fire. Frog swallowed, and grabbed the torch. For the hidden leaf. Frog brought the torch to his chest. His screams joined the chorus. The first thing Naruto noticed upon waking up was that he was in a hospital. Strapped to a bed, gown and all, with at least 4 sets of monitors pressed with little stickers along his skin. Fluorescent lights made his eyes squint and the smell of chemically cleaned surfaces left a crinkle in his nose. A machine next to his head went beep beep boop in that rhythmic pitter-patter that both annoyed him and made him want to fall back asleep. The second thing he noticed was that he hurt. Like, everywhere. He groaned, because even his jaw ached and anything close to language felt like hell. He blinked under the glow of nearby lights and tried to shift his vision from one side to the other. While it might have felt like a prison, the wide windows on one side of his room let the midday sun flood across his face. It felt warm against his full-bodied anguish, and he turned his face to soak in the rays. Finally up, kid. Naruto's head whipped back to his left, ignoring the burning pain the motion shot through his body. Gee. His voice cracked like gravel from disuse. Jiraya. The white-haired toad sage laughed, a deep rumble in his chest that finished with a hacking cough. Gone was his traditional red and olive GI, replaced by the simple white of a hospital gown identical to Naruto's own. His left hand wrapped up the shaft of an IV drip, but Jiraiya held it like a walking stick. Naruto's eyes surged, taking in the battered and bruised appearance of his teacher. Jiraiya snorted. What? He challenged, rising from his seat with a small but audible groan of effort because his entire being hurt, but damn it, he had a reputation to uphold. You thought fighting Orochimaru and the 4th Hokage and an invading army was something even I walk away from without a scratch? Naruto didn't say, well, yeah, but the expression was written across his face like it was tattooed. It had never occurred to him that Jiraiya had ever or could ever be injured. Famous shinobi like Jiraiya or Kages didn't get injured, never bled or bruised as they completed missions. They just came back, normal and ready and maybe a little covered in blood. Never theirs, though. Naruto's eyes traced the wrappings on Jiraiya's stomach and down his left thigh. But you're okay. The words left Naruto's mouth as the panic tension set in. Jiraiya gave a deep and strained laugh that looked painful to do, but his teeth were wide and white with a smile. I'm gonna be fine, the sage answered. A little knocked around, but I'll be back on my feet at the same time you will, I bet. Relief rushed through Naruto's veins like liquid anesthetic. He didn't even know how to register the idea of Jiraiya being injured. It had been jarring enough during their wave mission to see Kakashi out of commission, but Jiraiya and the 3rd Hokage was another thing entirely, and the air left Naruto's lungs with a dull hiss, his hands of ice around the frame of the bed. The old man. Naruto's spine trembled as the words passed his lips. As the old man. Naruto stopped short of saying, alive, the word tasted like it would make him vomit. Jiraiya nodded, reaching a bandaged hand to the blonde's arm and giving a squeeze. He's alive, he said, and Naruto felt stress leaving his lungs like poison bled from a wound. Naruto was halfway through leaning back and thanking whatever god was choosing to listen when Jiraiya continued. But ease. Jiraiya swallowed hard, his own eyes glazing over in the fluorescent light. The stress rumbled back through Naruto's gut, a bubbling storm. What? Naruto forced, his voice squeaked and strained between exhaustion and worry. What happened to him? He's not going to be able to move much anymore. Naruto blinked. Empty. Not move. His lips had words but his brain sputtered. Wheels spinning and tearing into mud, making a mess and going absolutely nowhere. What do you mean not move? He's paralyzed. Jiraya's eyes gazed off into the distance and Naruto didn't know if he was talking to him. It was weird seeing the toad Sanin like this. Wrong. Wrong, and it filled Naruto's gut with something that twisted and dragged and made him want to spit. When he crashed through the roof, a beam struck his back. Jiraiya lurched in a cough that was covering for the fact that his throat was closing up. He isn't able to move his legs. His voice was hazy, fractured. And his arms aren't much better. Naruto blinked and took a big breath in that hissed through his teeth. His lungs burned and his chest stretched and both hated him for it. Can't move his legs. Hiruzen Sarutobi, the god of shinobi. Old man, I don't understand, Naruto repeated, because that's the only way he felt. It looked like the words slapped Jiraiya in the face. Not hard, but the red stinging on the sage's cheeks hadn't been there before they had started talking. He won't ever be able to walk again, kid. Jiraiya's voice teetered in and out of a tone that ached and scrapped, and Naruto felt his gut sink. His body sitting on a void, teetering by the flimsiest of rope torn to nothing but loose strands. But he's alive, Naruto voice cracked. He is. Jiraiya tilted his head and swallowed through the response. He's alive because you were able to hold Orochimaru off and summon me. It was so flimsy, so fragile. 1,000 shards of glass with elephants on top. Spider-webbed fractals and ominous cracking sounds. But the glass was holding. Barely. He's alive. Naruto leaned back and the pillow beneath his head wrapped around his skull like a cocoon. He wanted the bed to swallow him. To take him back to when he had been unconscious and couldn't feel the world and the hateful truths that it made him feel. Hiruzen was alive. Naruto forced himself to remember that's what mattered. Can I see him? Naruto asked. Jiraiya shifted in his chair. He's unconscious. The medics aren't going to wake him until we have the right conditions to perform surgery. Naruto shifted, and a pain shot through his left side. What does right conditions mean? Jiraiya gave what sounded like a laugh but not in the least bit out of humor. I'll tell you everything, urged the blonde, as soon as you're out of that hospital bed. It was a testament to how little energy Naruto felt in his whole body that he accepted the answer without a fight. The blonde leaned back, blinking slowly and steadying his breathing to the beep 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 of his monitors. Jiraiya, Naruto said. No jokes. No hyperactive. No voice. The sage's body was hunched, ragged, but he gripped his IV stand and raised his head. Yeah, kid. Naruto's tongue clicked in his mouth while his eyes traced endless mazes into the ceiling tiles above him. Did I get strangled by my dad? Years later, Jiraiya would realize that there had never been a right answer to that question. He would think and spend nights staring at the stars wondering what he should have said in response this exact moment. Jiraiya didn't think he ever found the right one. Yeah. He said. Yeah, that was your dad. Huh. Jiraiya watched the boy like one watches a burning building. Waiting for that one cross beam, that one stubborn support to crumble and crack and send the whole thing into a heap of rubble and ash. Naruto tilted his head and just kind of stared. Huh. He said. Again. Jiraiya forced his arms to pull his body to his feet, rising tall so he could see the boy's face despite that pain movement shot through his ribs. Kid. He tried. Softer. Naruto. The blonde's face didn't move, didn't tilt or turn to the call. But his eyes stretched, just to the left, to catch Jiraiya's own. Are you alright? Naruto's eyes drifted to the ceiling. He tried to do that thing he'd been trying to do, lately. What was it, again? Oh yeah, thinking. Before he spoke. He'd been trying to do that so much lately so that Jiraiya would be proud of him and take him as his apprentice and he could be a better ninja and save his friends. The fourth Hokage's face flickered in his eyes. Crumbling and distant and blue and so. I didn't think I had a dad. Something inside Jiraiya shattered. A torpedo through stained glass and Jiraiya's entire heart wrinkled and it hurt worse than any bruise on his body. Sensei. Naruto continued. His voice was robotic, an intercom through a steel wall. Jiraiya had long imagined what blessed peace he would find the day Naruto learned to talk with restraint and didn't yell when he spoke. The quietness was awful, and the sage would give anything to have the joy back. I'm gonna go back to sleep, Naruto said. But when I'm out of here, you said we were going to go somewhere. On a training trip. Naruto's eyes shift, landing back on Jiraiya, and the focus makes Jiraiya's heart jump. We can still do that, right? He pressed. The weight of the air pressed into a thin line and sizzled in the distance. You're going to teach me how to be strong. Jiraiya nodded. That's the plan, Naruto. Good. It was wrong. It was all wrong. They were lucky to be alive, and a part of Jiraiya was horrified to imagine what would have transpired had he not found the blonde walking through the streets looking like a kicked puppy. Had Kakashi not gotten caught up, yet again, in the inky black red of the Sharingan and neglected the diamond sitting right in front of him. Naruto shifted, rolling to his side with his IV line pulled across his chest. Jiraiya exhaled, but stayed standing in the silence until the dull beeps of the boy's heart monitor matched his breathing. Satisfied that the kid was out, Jiraiya turned his bruised and aching body to the door. He didn't look like much of a shinobi, much of a warrior as he hunched and shuffled with his IV stand in tow. He didn't feel like much of a warrior now, anyhow. Without a sound, the sage turned the door to the blonde's room and made it into the hall. He was greeted by a single eye and a mop of white hair. Lord Jiraiya, the copy ninja said, seconds from entering the room. Jiraiya's gaze chilled. Kakashi. I didn't. Kakashi blinked, taking in both the state of Jiraiya's injuries and the way his own name sounded like an insult when the sage spoke. How is Naruto? Jiraiya pulled the door closed behind him, the soft click echoing in the fluorescent light of the hallway. Asleep, he said. Exhausted, but recovering. He's fine. That was a lie. The kid was a lot of things, but fine, sure as shit wasn't one of them. Kakashi probably knew that, but the man nodded, physically sighing in relief. It made Jiraiya's body tense. That's good, the copy ninja replied, sidestepping the Sannin and reaching for the door handle. I came to come check on him and see how he's. Jiraiya's hand snapped, grasping Kakashi's a breath from the door. What are you doing? Kakashi blinked and Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. I'm here to check on my student. Kakashi replied. Your student? Jiraiya laughed, salt and anger and ash. Is that what he is? Your student. A single eye stared, narrowed and eyeing the points on Jiraiya's body where bandages were wrapped the tightest. Words and escalation danced on his tongue like a reflex, but they died in his throat and Chunin slumped. I'm here to see Naruto, Jiraiya. Kakashi answered, pulling his arm back and out from the Sannin's grip but taking a step away from the door in response. I understand you might not be happy with me right now. Happy with you? Jiraiya's voice strained. He doubted it was good for his recovery or his blood pressure to explode with fury. Too late. I'm not happy with the Anbu security detailing to screening the Chunin exam candidates. I'm not happy with the way it took me 2 doctors before finding someone who was willing to check the kid for any serious injuries. The sage took a step, more menacing, hunched and clutching his IV stand that he'd ever been at full health. I'm so furious with you I can't even think straight. The silence settled like shards of glass around them. Kakashi carefully stepped. It was never my intention for Naruto to train alone. Kakashi replied. I had specifically recruited an elite tutor in order to. An elite tutor? Jiraiya balked. An elite tutor? Do you hear yourself? You were his Chunin instructor and you left him alone. He wasn't alone. Kakashi shot back. He had Ebisu and what? Hatake. He didn't channel any chakra, but the force that Jiraiya pushed into Kakashi's chest sent the man stumbling backwards. He didn't have anyone. I found him, sitting by himself trying to brute force stupid his way into fighting a kid older, stronger, and better trained than him. Jiraiya held his hands up, abandoning his crutch and letting his anger steady his balance. Against one of Guy's kids. You knew exactly what the hell he was up against and chose to abandon him to someone else. Jiraiya's eyes bore into the copy ninja and Jiraiya wished his bones didn't hurt and he didn't need to go to rest. He wanted to take his fist and shove it so far up Kakashi she'd see it with his blindfold on. What were you thinking, Kakashi? Kakashi whispered, unable to meet Jiraya's eyes and pointing his vision to the nearby window. I had to prepare Sasuke. His opponent had a technique he had no way of overcoming and he needed training. He needed it. Jiraya barked in a hollow laughter. And what about Naruto? What about that girl on your team? Thank Kami she didn't have to fight an opponent in the next round. Would you have abandoned her, too? The word abandoned hit the air and Kakashi recoiled. Jiraya's arm trembled, barely restrained. I didn't. He stammered. I wouldn't. Jiraya's blood went from simmer to boil. There was so much anger. So much hate and broken trust and fire. His fingers ached in his palms at how hard he was trying to squeeze them together so that he didn't do something he regretted. That Minato's own son would be abandoned by his teacher. Abandoned by Hiruzen and the whole village and a nauseating wave of self-loathing hit him. Where the hell had he been for the last 14 years, anyway? A feeling like ice shot down Jiraya's spine and landed in his gut. It tasted like hypocrisy and smelled like shame. Jiraya's stomach lurched as Kakashi's head fell, white hair falling and covering his face. I'm sorry, Kakashi said, voice dark and broken and weak. Jiraya wanted to scream. I never meant to. Jiraya couldn't handle the seeming sincerity of Hitaki's guilt mixed with his own. Like a tale of vinegar and gasoline. With a single raised hand, he halted the Chunin. Don't, he ordered. Just don't, Kakashi. There was a long silence between the two. Jiraiya was growing sick of long silences. Naruto, he began, burying his want to punch both Kakashi and then a mirror. Has been through enough. From everything. We both know the kid's road won't get any easier, but I am going to be damn sure that it changes starting today. Kakashi didn't speak, responding only in slow and solemn nods. I'm taking him with me. We're going to find Tsunade. Jiraiya continued. Kakashi's eye widened. Lady Tsunade? He asked. Jiraiya nodded. Hiruzen's paralyzed. He said, the words leaving his mouth but leaving a sick behind. If anyone's going to fix it, it will be her. Kakashi tilted his head. Doubt. You think she'll return to Konoha? He asked. No, is what Jiraiya wanted to say. That's why he was going in person in the first place. Tsunade's thoughts on Konoha be damned, Hiruzen was paralyzed and Orochimaru was responsible, it was time to come home. I do. He lied. And I'm bringing the kid as backup. How long will you be gone? We'll be back before the fall with Tsunade. Jiraiya answered. But after that I'm planning to leave the city for some time. Some time. Kakashi flipped the words on his lips like it was a threat. Will I? He swallowed. Can I say something to him? The thunder of Jiraiya's heartbeat had subsided, but a dull ache that remained made him feel old and tired and not in any mood to deal with this. If he wants to talk, you'll talk when we get back. Jiraiya's gaze lingered to the door, and then back to Kakashi's open eye. If he doesn't, he won't. There was more to say. Words and glares. Punches. Enough self-loathing to power a small city, at least. But none of that came. Kakashi's eye lingered on the point in the wall where Naruto's bed was, but a nod was his only answer. Jiraiya met it with his own, but he didn't leave the door until the copy ninja had turned and retreated down the hallway. Naruto was recovered in 2 days. They didn't prepare to leave for another week. The kid was. Jiraiya couldn't pin down the right word to adequately capture the situation. Quiet. Different. Nothing adequately captured. Traumatized learning you aren't an orphan by being strangled by your dead father. Jiraiya opted to lean in the doorway of the blonde's small studio apartment while the kid packed his things. We're going to need to get you new clothes. The sage offered as Naruto attempted to fold, a spare jumpsuit. The boy paused, staring into his orange clothing as though apologizing for considering the prospect of abandoning the outfit. I can't afford something new. Jiraiya wanted to snort, but his gut did that thing where he felt like he wanted to strangle someone. It's on me, kid. He rushed the words out and turned his head to look at anything other than the scene before him. If you want to bring it, but don't worry about money. Jiraya's head tilted, a small smirk. Can't promise it'll be orange, though. But it's the best color. 5 minutes later, Naruto crossed through his doorway, nothing but a wrapped bag of a single orange jumpsuit thrown over his shoulders. No triumphant jumps. No giddy jitters. Quiet lips and quiet eyes while his hands traced circles along the Haraishin kunai lining his waists. Ready? Jiraiya asked, because the kid wasn't saying anything. Naruto gave a nod, eyes shimmering with at least the ghost of an emotion, determination. I'm ready. It wasn't a lot, but Jiraiya would take what he could get. As the two set for the city gates, Jiraiya slowed to a step behind the boy to take in the city. Jiraiya didn't go many places without being recognized, one of the curses of fame and a core reason he often entered cities while hanged. In Konoha, his home, he was a full-blown celebrity. At first, the villagers tried to pretend they weren't tripping over themselves to get a glimpse of him. Eventually, some of them gave up being discreet and just started walking in the street beside them. Rushing from behind just to get a look at the Toad Sage's markings. Were they really written in the blood of Iwa Ninja? Did he have a toad's nose? Adults and children alike, curiosity-driven and not going to miss the rare chance of meeting the only actively loyal Sannin. Then they realized who was walking beside him. It took every ounce of restraint Jiraiya possessed to not grab the boy and just run. Summon Gamabunta and tell him to jump until they were somewhere in Wind Country. The people's eyes would drift to that single tuft of golden blonde hair, and the entire demeanor changed. Awe turned to loathing, curiosity to judgment, hate. Is that Lord Jiraiya? What's he doing with that thing? Maybe he's here to take it away. It stole the Haraishin. Lord Jiraiya won't allow that creature to corrupt the legacy of Lord Yodaemon. By the time they reached the main gate, a small trickle of blood ran down Jiraiya's clenched and shaking fist. Kid. Naruto turned. Yeah, is it? Jiraiya paused, giving a deep exhale and trying to remember his decades of meditative training. It brought him little peace. Is it always like this? Naruto thought for a moment, tilting his head back and giving a sideways glance to the crowd that had assembled behind them as they walked. The blonde shrugged. Not really. He answered. They're only still following because you're here. Jiraiya grunted, a semblance of acknowledgement, but there was a growing darkness behind his eyes. His face carried a look between disappointment and rage, but he quickly turned his head from the blonde to address the Anbu stationed at the village gate. Gate duty was usually a job for Chunin, but having the village overrun made the border security situation tense. Naruto's eyes wandered the blades held by the Anbu on duty. It looked a lot more scary than when Chunin were. Naruto. A voice rang out over the bustle of the gate, a blob of pink and red following. Naruto turned on a heel while Jiraiya gave only a glance before returning to his hushed negotiations. Sakura. He called back. He tried to make his voice sound more excited, but he was worried all he could sound was tired. Judging from how Sakura's shoulders slumped, she heard the difference. Naruto. For her part, Sakura opened her mouth a few times before finding the words that felt right. It took longer than she'd anticipated. I'm so glad to see you're safe. Naruto gave a soft smile, but it met his eyes. I'm happy you're safe, too. He answered back. I'm sorry I wasn't around when everything kind of went to shit. I got all caught up trying to find Gaara and Ero Sennin had this plan and. He trailed off, but Sakura only gave a small smile and laugh. It's okay, Naruto. Sakura held up her hand, open palm and not a fist. Her voice was a weird mixture between soft and tired and unsure. She was privately relieved that Naruto wasn't observant enough to notice the tension between the two. The silence that came after, however, even Naruto could feel. So, Sakura tried. So, Naruto mimicked, because he didn't know either. When did this get this hard? I came to the hospital. Sakura fidgeted, shifting onto her heels. You were still asleep, but you looked so peaceful. Naruto found a nervous laugh that felt like a cough. Yeah, Ero Sennin mentioned you came by. A genuine smile. Small, but genuine. Thanks for that. Sakura's gaze softened, but her nod was resolute. Team 7, she offered. Gotta check on our own. The mention of their name, the team, brought a steep inhale from the blonde. Did Sasuke? He started, but his voice trailed off as though he was unsure he even wanted to complete the question. Sakura swallowed and her eyes darted away. He's still recovering in the Uchiha mansion. Broken arm, she answered, before meeting him in the middle with an offering. I haven't seen him, either. Just Kakashi-sensei and now. Sakura's arms made a strange, pointing gesture forward. Now, you. The answer lingered, floating between the two like an off-tune melody. Naruto rocked on his heels and Sakura played with the fringes of her dress. You did well in the tournament, she said. Sakura wasn't used to being the one who filled the empty silences and it showed. Everyone couldn't believe how your fight went. Naruto blinked, and it took him too long to realize she meant Neji. His fight with Neji. Between Gaara and his zombie father and Orochimaru, Naruto had all but forgotten the Chunin exams had even taken place. He couldn't force a grin this time, but he did give a nod. Yeah, he answered. I could hardly believe it either. I'm sorry, Naruto. Naruto's eyes shot open, snapping from the dirt and meeting Sakura's own. Whiplash. What? He replied. I'm sorry. Sakura repeated. I never bothered to find you or ask you what was happening last month. I feel like I've blinked and now everything's different. It's okay, he told her, because he wasn't certain what else to say but that felt right. I don't think I understand it either but it's okay. Sakura shook her head, and Naruto could see moisture welling under her eyes. No, it's not, she continued. We're supposed to be a team and we weren't there for you. I want you to know we're here for you. Sakura. Really, it's fine. I'm okay he tried to reply, but Sakura didn't stop. And now you're leaving, again, and I just want us to be able to sit down and talk as a team because it's not right. Naruto's smile straightened to a thin line, and his back tightened to match. Again, he said. What do you mean again? Sakura blinked. Her voice wavered, and her eyes gave quick glances to Jiraya's back. You're leaving with Jiraiya-sama. No, I know. But again, why are you saying again? His face was so focused. Blue eyes looking straight at her. Through her. His voice wasn't angry, but Sakura couldn't place the distance separating the two. Like during the tournament when you left and when I left. Naruto's shoulders rolled, his eyes narrowing a fraction but his tone dipped and chilled. Sakura blinked wet eyes, but her words didn't form a response. Do you think that I left? He asked, voice empty. Sakura gaped. She stammered. I don't mean you left, but we didn't know where you had gone off to and where I had gone off to. Naruto repeated, but his voice sounded lost. Sakura's insides twisted further. I didn't know where you were. No one even came to ask where I was or what I was doing for a full month. With Ebisu, Sakura interjected, quietly. We had doomed you were training with Ebisu like Kakashi-sensei said. Naruto leaned back, and a fire surged in his stomach that he didn't recognize. He felt sweaty, and no one thought to check. His voice cracked, and Sakura felt the guilt that had been building in her gut since the tournament swell like a typhoon. The girl's posture shrank. I didn't. Her voice tinged with guilt and forming tears. We tried to. The pinkett sniffed, wiping a fist across her flooding cheeks. She was crying. Sakura was crying in front of him. I didn't. He couldn't place the heat in his stomach, but the sight of Sakura breaking quenched his insides. The fire roared, feelings that he didn't understand but made him want to go punch a tree or yell at someone really loud until the world went back to easy and simple. His reflexes tried to reach out, to grab Sakura's arm and tell her it was okay because she was Sakura and Naruto never wanted to see Sakura upset. But at the same time, something in his chest snarled. The gesture stopped halfway with Naruto clutching not but air. He lowered his hand back to his side in a frustrated fist, and Sakura kept crying. It didn't make him sad. It didn't make him happy. He just felt tired. Naruto began, trying to find words that worked. I'm tired, Sakura-chan. And I'm upset. And I don't feel like, good, right now. Sakura sniffled, her breath ragged as stood rooted before her teammate. Naruto had never lectured Sakura. Is this what it's like to be lectured? Naruto's head felt heavy and he just wanted this to stop. This wasn't what he wanted. I'm not leaving for good. He corrected, shifting the focus and trying to keep his head from filling with hurt. I'll be coming back. But I can't handle this right now. I can't. Naruto clenched his fist and tried to will his frustration out from his hand. His fist didn't stop shaking. I just can't do this right now. He finished. But when I get back, maybe you and Sasuke and me, maybe we can talk. Sakura's head tilted, blinking through clouded eyes. Talk? Was it a question? What did that mean? This was not how she saw this conversation going. Not how it had gone in her head. This was Naruto. Loud and obnoxious Naruto. Happy-go-lucky, most talkative knuckle-headed ninja in the world Naruto. Her eyes drifted up and down, soaking in the boy standing before her. His hair looked like Naruto. His clothes looked like Naruto. But he wasn't loud. He wasn't yelling or smiling or jumping or asking her on a date. This Naruto looked distracted, tired. His mouth was low and his hands were shoved into his pockets. Sakura couldn't see, but his fingers made little fists around the hilt of the Hiroshin kunai. It was the moment Sakura realized that she didn't recognize Naruto anymore. What's more, from the way he was looking at her, he felt the same way. Had it really only been a month? Yeah, she whispered, hurried and increasingly upset. Yeah, when you get back. Sakura gave Naruto a bow. An apology. Well wishes. The blonde doesn't get a chance to ask. A muted sound, a mixture between, I'm sorry, and, goodbye, escaped the pinket's lips before she turned and darted back into the city proper. Naruto blinked, standing silently by the gate before being consumed with a feeling of frustration. His hands shot from his pockets and covered his eyes at the palm, exhaling a strained and captive groan through closed lips. Jiraiya took this as the moment to re-enter the scene. He didn't have a quip or a wisdom. No lewd comment and no learned lecture. Jiraiya just placed his hand on Naruto's shoulders and gave the boy a squeeze. Let's go, kid, he instructed. I think you need a little space from here. Naruto nodded, and the two walk out of the city without another word. By the second night, Jiraiya intervened. Kid, he called, leaning on one arm and watching the blonde from across the blaze of their campfire. The clearing was dark and the night was cool, stars and clouds mingling overhead. We need to talk. Naruto froze mid-bite, tearing off a hunk of grilled rabbit leg and shoving it into his mouth. There wasn't an etiquette class at the academy and Naruto wouldn't have attended it, anyway. MHFF. Naruto's cheeks were puffy with stuffed meat. Jiraiya made a noise between a groan and a chuckle. Swallow, then answer. He instructed. Naruto gulped, and Jiraiya made a note to teach the boy either table manners or how to perform the self-Heimlich. Sorry. Naruto grumbled, pulling his meal away but still close at hand. Talk about what? Jiraiya's eyes shimmered like the fire. It's been 2 days. We've been traveling for 2 days and I think you've said about 30 words the whole time. The boy was an open book, and Jiraiya found a morbid amusement in how easily he could read the pages. Confusion turned into angst. Angst turning into defiance with a side of obstinance. It didn't take any expertise in feelings or teenagers to know exactly the thoughts going through the boy's mind, but it hit Jiraiya like a memory. While his own recollection of being a teenager were dimming, those that knew him were sure to remind him that Jiraiya had been just as transparent into his teens. An open book for the world to read. Another chapter. Jiraiya frowned. Open book the boy may be, but he wished it would have ended on a chapter different than the tired sigh the boy settled on. I just haven't had anything to say. Naruto countered, his eyes drifting back into the flame and watching the popping wood. Jiraiya snorted. Horseshit. Naruto's boggled, snapping from the fire to meet the Jiraiya's gaze. Did he just say horseshit? What? He stammered. Jiraiya nodded. Sagely, it was annoying how often he did that. You heard me. Horseshit. He said, not budging an inch. You've got a lot to say, you're just not doing it. Naruto opened and closed his mouth as though hoping the next time he tried it something witty and clever would come out rather than a huff of indignant hot air. And, the boy's voice dour and defeatist and almost too quiet for Jiraiya to hear. Just because I'm not talking doesn't mean something's wrong. Were it possible, Jiraiya's eyes would have rolled out of his head. He put his effort into making sure his response didn't carry any lingering sarcasm. Kid, he said, calmly, I think we both know that's not true. We need to be honest between us. Naruto shifted with a huff, looking every bit the teenager he was. Since when did you become some kind of doctor? The blonde grumbled, pulling another bite of rabbit into his mouth and chewing with an extra dose of angst. Jiraiya gave a nod, leaning his head back and staring up into the stars. You're right, I'm not a doctor. Jiraiya conceded, holding his own rabbit over the fires until its leg began to char. But until we can find you a real doctor, I am here. And you've got a lot you want to talk about and you need to talk about it because the only thing less healthy than what you've been through over the past week is bottling it up until you rupture like a little blonde balloon. If Naruto thought that his teacher had a point, he did a good job of not showing it. His first instinct, a petulant, didn't have any real bite to it. Jiraiya took that to mean he was making progress. You don't have to cover everything. We can talk about whatever you're ready to talk about. Jiraiya offered, his voice a soothing background to the crackling fire. There was an immense irony in pressing the boy like this. The man who ran away to not have her talk about feelings lecturing his student on how to talk about their feelings. Were he here to see it, Hiruzen would have laughed his way into retirement, no doubt. But Jiraiya wasn't the student anymore, and he damn sure wasn't going to let the blonde repeat his mistakes. Maybe we just talk about one thing that's on your mind. Naruto tried to have a reply to that. Something quick and cutting that stupid Jiraiya would never see coming and would put him verbally back into his place. Was he trying to call him weak or something? Some namby-pamby little loser ninja who couldn't. The fire crackled and Naruto swallowed. The words came before he realized he was speaking. One thing. Yeah, he had one thing. He whispered, his voice shaking and his eyes welling. Jiraiya didn't move, his eyes glued to the blonde across the flame. The fourth Hokage was my dad. It was as much statement as question, hot and heavy and cracking inside Naruto's voice. Jiraiya said nothing. I have a dad. The boy continued, raising his eyes and his whole posture screamed something that made Jiraiya's insides churn. Yeah, Jiraiya replied, finding his own voice more conflicted than he'd imagined. That's probably a good one to start with. Naruto's fingers rolled against his remaining food, a rabbit tendon snapping beneath his thumb. He chucked the remnants of bone into the fire. Did you know? The question hung in the air like oil in water. There was anger, confusion, hurt, a roiling mass of emotions underneath, but the tension of exhaustion and desperation kept the mixture contained. Jiraiya nodded. I did. Naruto's voice sounded like sandpaper. Dry and raspy and tearing away slowly but surely at something. Why? Why what? Naruto's hand gripped his log so tight a sliver of wood cleaved off. Why? He accused, snapping his eyes to his teachers. Did no one tell me? Jiraiya exhaled and was overwhelmed by a feeling of heavy. He couldn't match Naruto's quaking glare, and he kept his eyes drawn to the center of the flickering flame as memories filled his mind. The day you were born was the worst day in the history of Konoha. The Kyuubi no Kitsune appeared. It attacked the village. It killed thousands. Your father found a way to stop it, to seal it, but it cost him his life. He sealed the demon into you, and instructed Hiruzen to never tell a soul. Naruto's feet shifted, pushing dirt. Old man. He mumbled. He knew. Jiraya nodded. He did. Silence lingered while the fire crackled. Jiraya took a glance up. The stars were beautiful. Did anyone else know? Naruto asked, using his foot to stamp out an errant ember from the flame. His foot fell with a muffled stomp. Jiraiya shook his head. Sarutobi, me, Tsunade. He replied. I know there's a few who have put two and two together, but this was a guarded secret. Naruto's brow furrowed, the kindling in his hand snapping as his thumb tore it to shreds. But why? He demanded, unable to stop the wetness growing under his eyes and the heat growing in his gut. Why did I have to get hidden away? Why did I have to live my whole life in a gutter and alone if people knew? His body shook, hands twisting a kindling branch into a mangled knot. Tears fell in the dirt, an errant drop sizzling on a fire-cooked stone. Naruto broke. Why would he leave me alone? Jiraiya was standing before the words left the boy's mouth. His eyes swell, body rushing forward and eyes burning brighter than if the whole forest had caught ablaze. He was kneeling next to the boy a heartbeat later. Your father made a decision to save the village, our home. He asked you to carry the greatest burden of all but knew that if anyone knew you were his son, they would come for you. Jiraiya's own voice wavered and the scars along his back ached. He ordered you be hidden to protect you from his enemies. Jiraiya had never prepared for this. Decades came crashing in with a thunderous silence and it was all he could do to keep his voice afloat. He knew it would bring you nothing but struggle, but it was the only way to keep you safe. If people knew who you were his son and the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, they would have stopped at nothing to get at you. You would have been a target. The village would have been a target. Naruto's body trembled. Pain and hurt and sorrow bottled so tight the glass was shaking. Jiraiya pulled, clenching the boy in his arms and giving a hug that lifted Naruto from his seat. Namikaze Minato loved you more than life itself. He would have done anything to keep you safe. Anything. Jiraiya's voice was thunder, pounding in the blonde's ears. Don't you ever doubt how much your father loved you. Naruto shattered. The toil and sorrow bursting like a dam as he let himself collapse into his teacher's embrace. Jiraiya's own tears fell. But why me? Naruto asked, and Jiraiya just wouldn't stop tightening. If he loved me then why did? Words were failing. The boy's chest heaved as a dam of emotions ruptured. Jiraiya could feel himself being swept away by the current. He held the boy tighter but forgot who was supporting who. But why did he have to die? Naruto sobbed and Jiraiya recoiled, shaking the blonde's shoulders like he'd been struck. He didn't want to. The sage snapped, dismissing the notion in an instant. His own voice was cracking, the weight of the conversation pressing down on his soul. Gods, he didn't want to. But the Hokage has a job, to protect the village. He saw the threat and realized the only way to make sure he could protect the village, to protect you, was make that choice. The Hokage's choice. The fire crackled, and neither master nor student spoke for what felt like ages. The fire burned and simmered, the crackling of wood the only sound under the star's sky. After a time, the blonde pushed his mentor off, gentle but firm. He was sniffling, trying his best to regain his composure but failing. Jiraiya found himself doing the same. They sat in silence while the night wind dried their tears. Can I ask one more question? Idiot, Jiraiya thought. What a stupid thing for the kid to say. Of course, Naruto. Did you? Naruto's eyes were watering again, but his voice was different than before. Not quite as broken, not quite as lost. This time it was nervous, cautious, hopeful. Did you know my mom? Naruto blinked, confused, a hint of judgment tinging his voice. Tsunade is here. The building was a monstrosity. Wood and plaster and at least 4 stories of the most god-awful shade of sea's foam green Naruto had ever seen. All down the road, perfectly normal businesses existed. Quaint little storefronts, sensible architectural choices. The blonde's eyes gazed upon the structure and was overwhelmed by the tackiness. Cat Burglar's Casino? He asked, leaning back and squinting at the neon glow of the entrance signs. Jiraiya gave a shrug. I know Tsunade like I know the back of my hand. He shrugged, his voice caught between amusement and annoyance. If she's in this town, she's in this building. As they watched, two patrons pushed through the cartoonish saloon doors swinging in the front. One was skipping, clutching his newfound winnings to his chest and all but singing. The other looked like he had empty pockets and an empty future. Neither looked sober enough for 11 in the morning. When Iruka-sensei taught us about the Sanin he never mentioned. Naruto gestured vaguely to the general avarice. This. Jiraiya snorted. Better her habits than mine. He mumbled, hopefully low enough that Naruto didn't hear before giving his student a more serious appraisal. Alright, let's go over the game plan one more time, he commanded, switching the subject and straightening his back. Naruto gave an eager nod as he rehearsed his lines. We go in. If you find Tsunade, I come find you. If I find Tsunade, I come find you. Jiraiya beamed, flashing a thumbs up and a trademark smile. When in doubt, let me handle it. He gave Naruto's shoulder a pat. You're catching on quick, star pupil. Naruto squinted, battling the growing suspicion that he was being patronized, but a firm pat on the shoulder killed the growing mutiny. Naruto followed his teacher to the door, pausing as Jiraiya made one final adjustment and turned. Before we get started, he interrupted, a gloved hand resting on the swinging salon door. Do you know what Tsunade looks like? Naruto shrugged. Blonde. Jiraiya snorted, pushing open the door and making his way into the casino with a small laugh. Yeah, close enough. The casino was an explosion of color and sound. Lights and patrons flickered, crammed inside the windowless building like koi fighting over the same scraps of food. Naruto crinkled his nose, the smell of smoke and desperation physically palpable. This is what casinos are like. He wondered, but found Jiraiya had disappeared into the crowd, evaporating amongst the crowd to the back left corner of the building. Naruto stood on his toes to try and spot white hair, but only noted a large bar on that side of the wall. Surely, a coincidence. All right, Naruto, he whispered to himself, because all the best ninja gave themselves pep talks. Crowded casino, blonde lady. How hard can it be? As it turned out, a lot of blonde ladies were at casinos. After 20 minutes of dedicated searching resulted in 20 minutes of women who were definitively not a Sanin, Naruto was getting nowhere. He had, as though it were a rite of passage, been almost puked on twice by random grown adults so drunk they could barely stand. With a huff, the young blonde stormed through a side doorway, away from the crowd and finding himself in a quiet ancillary bar. The rooms was small and mostly empty, a single bartender serving only a handful of patrons. In the corner, a relaxed man played a low and haunting tune on piano. Naruto looked back, a roar returning from the other hall. He scurried inside. Better than that, at least, he thought, just happy to be out of the circus and in a place he could actually hear himself think. Now I just need to. There was a soft smack, and Naruto stumbled backwards. He'd been so distracted looking around he'd completely barged into a nearby stranger. The woman had pretty black hair and prettier black eyes that made the white stand out on her black houri. The woman leaned with a casual boredom, a classic, I'd rather be anywhere else than right here, right now, as the sound of bar and debauchery trickled in from the main hall. Naruto felt his throat dry with a smack, stumbling over his feet and words as he tried to get through an apology. Sorry miss. He blathered. I didn't see. Naruto blinked. A small set of beady eyes blinked back, centered in a chubby pink face. Naruto's head tilted and his voice acted before he could stop. It's a pig. He blurted, apology forgotten and head tilting at the creature. The teacup pig, who was wearing clothes which Naruto thought was wild, tilted its head in return. The dark-haired woman nodded. It is, she confirmed, happy to clear up the confusion. Her name is Tauntaun. Naruto blinked, unsure of what to do with this information. He squinted, leaning closer to investigate. Is she here to gamble? The woman's face brightened, an amused giggle escaping her lips as Naruto continued his staring contest with the small creature. No, she's not old enough. She replied, simply. The woman crouched, meeting Naruto's eyes, and the blonde blushed furiously as he turned. And aren't you young to be in a casino, as well? No, I mean, yeah, but. His voice felt like he'd dropped it, and when did it get so hot in this room? Was he sweating? Naruto pulled at the end of his jacket and tried to regain his composure under the woman's amused eye. I'm not here to gamble, I was following my master. The woman rolled her head back in a laugh that sounded like experience. Naruto gave an awkward but happy smile at the reaction. Well, that's relatable. Her voice had this soothing quality Naruto found himself instantly smitten with. She gave a small bow in introduction, accepting his apology and waving a hand to the stool near her in invitation. Since, I take it, you won't be participating in the hedonism, you're welcome to join me, she invited. Naruto beamed. I'm Shizune. Naruto ambled forward, jumping to sit in the stool as his legs dangled. He didn't know what hedonism meant, but it sounded like something Jiraiya would have liked. This woman felt like better company. Naruto, he greeted, pushing his hand a little too far forward. Shizune smiled, accepting the boy's outstretched hand with a slight bow of her head. Naruto squawked, remembering that he knew about manners and should maybe try them, sometimes. He half bowed from the stool and looked like an idiot, but Shizune's laugh melted the tension like warm rain over frost. It's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto. She smiled. What brings you here to this casino? Naruto fidgeted, craning his neck and keeping an eye for blonde hair from the corner of his eyes because he was on a mission and couldn't get distracted by pretty girls with nice smiles. I'm here on a mission, he answered, not remembering proper mission protocol was usually to not announce that you were on a mission. Shizune's eyes glanced up to the hyatt tied around his head, and a flicker or acknowledgement crossed her gaze. Ah, she said, voice stretching. I see you are a shinobi. Naruto nodded, a lion's pride roaring in his chest that she had noticed. Yep. He pointed to the symbol, half in an effort to accentuate, half in overwhelming pride of the Konoha crest. Do you know Konoha? Shizune's lips pursed, her gaze turning from the blonde and looking back out over the bright lights of the casino. Yes, she responded, and her voice sounded quiet against the arcade whirl of machines. Naruto swallowed, suddenly wondering if the reason Jiraya's headband didn't have the Konoha leaf on it was to avoid the sudden void that entered the back of Shizune's voice. It reminded him of talking to Inari. Yes, I'm familiar with Konoha shinobi. Naruto didn't know how to follow up, and he shrank into his seat with a, oh. The casino noise filled the silence between the two, and Naruto wished he didn't feel like the cause. Shizune's eye watched the boy slump, and she gave a rough cough as she snapped back her focus. What brings you to this small town, Naruto-kun? She asked, and the warmth in her voice returned. Naruto swelled. This is a few days' journey from Konoha. Well, both Naruto and Shizune turned, swiveling in their chair as Jiraiya swirled a darkened drink in his glass against the bar. He's here with me, and I have to say at this point I'm glad I brought him. Jiraiya poured a long sip of brown liquid, the cup clanking against the countertop as he watched the remnants swirl. It's good to see you, Shizune-chan. The dark-haired woman's mouth gaped, and Naruto watched as a fluster brushed across her whole face. She turned her gaze back to the blonde before back to Jiraiya, visibly connecting dots. Jiraiya-sama, she exclaimed. It was weird, Naruto thought, at the change he noticed in Shizune's voice. She wasn't scared, of that he was certain. Alarmed, but Jiraiya did have a shitty habit of coming out of absolutely nowhere and startling people. He was remarkably stealthy for a 2-meter-tall mop of white hair. But there was something in the way Shizune wrapped her arms around her pet pig, protective and pulling away, that made Naruto's stomach sink. He talked to her like a friend. She didn't reciprocate. I didn't know that you were coming. She stammered. Jiraiya smiled, taking another sip of his drink and visibly cringing at the wonderful burn that flooded his throat. Bit of an unplanned journey, he said, finishing the drink in 2 more gulps and rising to his full height. But you must forgive me, Shizune-chan, my manners are lacking as we aren't here without purpose. Jiraiya rounded the bar, stopping a half-meter away from the two but feeling like a giant. His body faced Shizune, but his eye line was glued over the casino floor. Naruto tried to follow, to see if there was something more dramatic than flashing lights and depleted savings at the end of the gaze. He couldn't see over the slot machines. I need to speak with her. Jiraiya said, very much making it sound like a request, but Naruto could tell it wasn't. Shizune looked like she had been expecting the not request, her features steeled. She doesn't want company right now. I bet not. Jiraiya answered, his voice caught between a dark laugh and a burning fire. It was so razor-thin Naruto couldn't tell if he wanted to speak or fight, at this point. Jiraiya flicked back the rest of his drink in a single gulp, shoving the glass aside preparing for either. But she needs it. For a moment, Shizune appeared contemplative. She eyed Jiraiya like a woman eyes a stranger, which was weird because apparently they already knew each other. But Shizune looked so unsure. So protective of whatever Jiraiya was about to say or do to her master. The raven-haired woman breathed deep, giving a simple nod. Her eyes certain, albeit cautious. It was almost as if she was daring Jiraiya to misbehave. This way. Shizune turned, pushing off from the bar and stepped onto the casino floor. Jiraiya headed. Naruto took it as a signal to follow as they pushed back through the main hall. The floor was like a circus, money flowed out and booze flowed in, cries of joys and defeats mixing against the smell of smoke. Shizune's small frame disappeared behind the shifting crowds. Naruto resolved to just follow Jiraiya through the madhouse. Eventually, the trio slipped away from the floor and up a quiet wooden staircase. The noise of the main hall slowly faded into the distance while the decor of the hallway became increasingly priced. A high rollers club. Jiraiya mused, his frustration momentarily giving way to something like nostalgia. Color me surprised. Shizune was far less amused, a huff escaping her lips. By the fourth door, she stopped and jutted a finger inside the closed room. She's in the middle of a game. She began, so you'll have to get the rest of the table too. It was like getting smacked by a tidal wave. Chakra flared, Naruto and Shizune both staggering as an oppressive heat emanated from Jiraiya's body. Without a word, he grabbed and tore at the screen door, slamming it wide. The room was extravagant, green floors and golden ceilings with torchlight casting a smoky shadow over a gilded display. A table of 5 men stared back, a growing sense of doom filling them all. Jiraiya's voice was casual, calm, but there was a lightning behind his eyes and the wood groaned from an unseen pressure as he entered. He didn't acknowledge a single one, his eyes were glued to the blonde hair and green eyes of the dealer. Get out. The pressure pulsed at his commandment as the floor started to buckle the rafters. One of the men grasped at his throat and heart as the rest scurried like rats out the side door. Dignity and chips forgotten at the table. The dealer remained motionless. Annoyed. You ruined my game, you know. The woman said, pushing a strand of blonde hair behind her head and frowning. Her fingers ruffled through the cards creased in her hand. Pair of queens. The cards folded in her hands. These were good cards. She should have known something would come and ruin her luck if she's holding 2 pair before the turn. Tsunade flicked her bent cards to the center, imagining throwing Jiraiya with the same ease. That was a good hand. She said, but it sounded like a threat. Jiraiya was in no mood for games. Maybe he'd just been in a piss-poor mood since leaving Konoha, but now he was feeling every year of his age. He was 30 years too old to deal with Tsunade's games. Hiruzen is paralyzed, he said, leading with the hammer and laying it on the table with the weight of an anvil. Tsunade was busy pulling in the abandoned chips from her terrorized competition, but the declaration halted her mid-rake. For a moment, at least. I heard, she answered. Her voice wasn't gloating, but it wasn't sad, either. A surgical scalpel, balancing the line between life and death and apathy and heartbreak. Jiraiya squinted, confused. You knew. He stepped through the doorway until his frame towered over the table. Shizune gave Naruto a small shove, herding him into the room while she went to shut the door behind them. Privacy was probably warranted. How could you know? Tsunade gave the man she knew for a fact to be Konoha's spymaster an annoyed look. What? I'm not allowed to hear things. She replied, and Naruto had to bite down his sudden urge to throw a chair at the woman who was apparently the only person in the world who could fix the old man. She couldn't do that if he threw a chair at her. Probably. From the way his shoulders tensed, Jiraiya felt the same way. Hiruzen can't move his legs or his arms and you knew. Jiraiya layered the emphasis at the end with his whole chest. You knew. His words were like stones pounding down a mudslide. You knew, and yet you're sitting here. Playing a damn card game. Jiraiya's fist was a rocket, moving with the rays of his voice. His open palm slammed into the table faster than Naruto or Shizune could follow. There was a groan, and the wood made spider web cracking sound. Chips fell from the perfect towers and sounded like glass as they toppled to the floor. Tsunade glared, not breaking her shuffle. I'm not involved with Konoha and I haven't been for a decade. She hissed, voice low and clearly not intimidated by Jiraiya's show of strength. I'm not going to get involved, now. Not involved. Jiraiya balked, because apparently he'd been taking crazy pills for 50 years and had lost all sense of what it meant to belong. You're a senju. You've been involved with Konoha since the day you were born. And what has that gotten me, Jiraiya? Tsunade's voice was level but there was an edge that threatened to rip the table in half and shove the other half down Jiraiya's throat. A heat built, pushing and Naruto realized it was becoming increasingly difficult to breathe. He looked to Shizune, who shifted. She could still breathe, but she was sweating. You don't get to come here and lecture to me about what I have to do for Konoha. Tsunade all but growled. You and Hiruzen and Orochimaru can cripple and tear and sever your limbs all you want. Tsunade rose, and she kicked her chair so hard that when it hit the wall it didn't really break, more disintegrated. Leave me the hell out of it. Jiraiya's nose twitched, a sudden smear crossed his face like he'd smelt something rancid. His voice dropped, and the room's temperature followed. Naruto had to remind his lungs to breathe. How did you know that Orochimaru is missing his left arm? The words hung like ice. The big sharp ice that hung from the ceiling that if it fell went, licked, and impaled things and people or anything unlucky enough to get caught beneath. Tsunade shattered the glare, cursing her mistake under her breath. He came to you. Jiraiya continued, because suddenly everything was starting to make painful sense and his blood pressure was starting to get painfully high. You actually sat and listened to the lunatic that just tried to burn your home to the ground, tried to kill our teacher, tried to kill me. Jiraiya was shouting, and Tsunade refused, couldn't, meet his gaze. The sage pressed the attack. Whatever he's offered you, whatever he's trying to give you is a lie, Tsunade. You know that. Jiraiya's voice was loud but there was a desperation in his voice that made Naruto feel sick. Feelings older than he was getting thrown back and forth and Shizune and he just, watching. Spectators to asteroids colliding. Something Jiraiya had said had clearly affected Shizune, though, Naruto could feel the shuddered breaths and hot tears welling in the young woman's eyes. Tsunade. Jiraiya's voice collapsed, fist balling and slamming again into the hardwood. Tell me, damn you. What is Orochimaru holding over you that's making you act like this? The Tsunade I knew would never. The Tsunade you knew. The blonde woman exploded, chakra surging and obliterating the poker table's remains in a single blow. The Tsunade you knew died in the Second Shinobi War when her village sent the last good things it had out to be slaughtered. The slug Sanin was heaving, body physically shaking and her heart a frothing maelstrom. Jiraiya, if anything, slumped. His anger and frustration morphed into a dark and hollow sound that barely scraped out from his throat. Understanding. Sorrow. Tsunade. Jiraiya's voice was a whisper, but there was something broken inside. Next to him, Shizune burst, hot tears now staining her cheeks in unfiltered sorrow. Naruto realized he didn't understand what the hell was going on but he knew it was awful. You know he can't bring them back. Bring them back. Bring who back? Naruto's eyes bounced between Jiraiya to Tsunade, Shizune to Jiraiya. His eyes lingered on Tsunade, who was shaking her head back and forth as though motion would refuse the response. Leave. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a threat. Tsunade's head was hung, strands of hair leaving her eyes in darkness as she pointed towards the door. No. Tsunade twitched. Jiraiya stood from his chair and planted his feet. I'm warning you. I'm not leaving, Tsunade. The woman's fist clenched, a cracking sound snapping through her knuckles. Jiraiya's flexed his neck, stance widening and eyes going dark. I won't tell you twice. Enough. That was enough. Both of you, knock it off. The pressure that had filled the room, pushing and pounding, dissipated with a snap. Tsunade's head twisted, and Naruto found her green eyes on him for the first time since they walked in the door. Who the hell is this child? She snarled, eyeing the blonde up and down. Naruto's voice fizzled. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and those. Tsunade trailed off as her eyes lowered, catching the distinctive three-pronged kunai hanging secured to Naruto's side. A rush of realization splashed across her face, and she snapped back to Jiraiya with, if it was even possible, a deeper outrage. You didn't, she said, disbelief matching disgust. Jiraiya didn't flinch as Tsunade burst into a scalding laughter. Unbelievable, she exclaimed, and it felt so wrong because this wasn't funny at all. You come here, accuse me of delusions and then go around teaching children the Hirishin. Of all of the irresponsible, holier-than-thou grandstanding you have ever pulled, this has got to be one of the most bullshit hypocrisies I have ever. Orochimaru used the Edo Tensei to summon Minato. When Naruto intervened, Orochimaru ordered Minato to strangle his only son. Jiraiya's words dropped like iron and sliced like a knife. The room fell so silent Naruto could feel his own heart beating. Tsunade lurched, cut mid-rant and breath socked from her chest. WWH, she wheezed. What? Jiraiya's face sunk, eyes dark and heavy and every word felt like pain. The Edo Tensei. Orochimaru summoned Minato to kill Sarutobi and take over the village. Jiraiya spoke slow, metered. Naruto fought the flashbacks that raged inside his mind and his little fists balled so hard his palms started bleeding. Shizune, for the first time, broke her gaze from her master and gave Naruto a horrified stare. He wished he was invisible. But the Edo Tensei doesn't bring back people. It brings back monsters. Jiraiya looked in Naruto's direction, and there was a new sadness that felt like shame. Something hot and wet ran down Naruto's cheek and he didn't know what it was, but he sure as hell knew he wanted this conversation to end. Now. Gratefully, Jiraiya clocked the discomfort. He lowered his shoulders and let a deep sigh take the remaining tension away, carried by his own exhaustion. We're going to be staying here for the next week, Tsunade. Shizune. Neither of the two women answered. Shizune was doing her best to look at Naruto like he needed to be scooped up and held like a newborn child. Tsunade was staring into the crater that was the poker table, eyes shaking and focus a million miles away. You want us to leave for tonight, and I agree. It's time for us to go. But, Tsunade, I want to make a deal. The slug Sanin's eyes flickered at her own name. Her voice never came to answer, but Jiraiya got enough eye contact to continue. Whatever deal, the word left Jiraiya's mouth like poison spit. You are considering with Orochimaru, you ought to know damn well what you'll be getting on the other side. He pointed a heavy finger at Naruto. The blonde swallowed. It just so happens that my student is in need of a medical professional who can talk him through the shit that he's been wading through. You and I both know I sure as shit aren't qualified to be offering anyone psychiatric support. Tsunade blinked, turning a gaze towards Naruto filled with an overwhelming sense of confusion. Naruto was able to reciprocate. Jiraiya watched the display and gave a long, pained sigh. I'm not sure you're in the state to help anyone right now, either. He acknowledged. But there's a very short list of people he can actually talk to, freely, and we're going to play the cards we're dealt. Shizune is more than qualified and I trust her with my life. Jiraiya held up a finger, looking tired and frustrated and whole lot less than the great Jiraiya the gallant. 1 week. You let Shizune help Naruto. In exchange, I tell you exactly what comes out when Orochimaru offers you Dan and Nawaki from an Edo Tensei grave. His deal spoken, the Toad Sage was by Naruto's side in one fluid movement, a hand reaching for his student's shoulders. It looked steady, but the moment it hit his arm Naruto was aware of the rattling tremor in his master's grip. We'll be at the river, tomorrow. East side, after sunrise. Jiraiya called, ushering the blonde out the door and leaving the women to the silence that had been there when they entered. We'll wait for your answer, there. The last thing Naruto saw as they turned the corner and disappeared into the casino were Tsunade's green eyes boring into his soul. Calm chakra, kid. Jiraiya guided, walking the path of peace and using slow words. Naruto's head bobbed above the river's surface like a discarded cork. The boy was drenched, head to toe sopping with long, wet hair covering his eyes and a flustered puff in his cheeks. You're trying to cook an egg with a forest fire. Low and steady, an even coating across your whole foot. The blonde beached like a whale, clawing out along the rocky shore and wringing an ocean out of his jacket. He cast his teacher a scathing, soggy glare. Maybe if you would quit throwing rocks at my head while I'm balancing, I would be able to do it longer. Your enemies won't wait for you to find your balance. Jiraiya countered, rolling his shoulders and giving sage wisdom from his sage wisdom shop. You practice until even rocks at your head can't stop you. The profanity-laden response Naruto gave was muffled by splashing, the boy pushing his body forward and trying to find something resembling steady footing on the river's rolling surface. From his spot on land, annoyingly dry, Naruto thought, Jiraiya kept watch while he put the final logs beneath their cooking fire. Food will be ready, soon. He called, his voice switching from teacher to diplomat while Naruto fell, again, with a splash into the water. Shizune and Tsunade watched on, witnesses to the Sisyphean struggle from the comfort and relative dryness of the land. They had arrived after dawn, Jiraiya midway through his patience and Naruto all the way out of dry clothes. Jiraiya had given them a nod, continuing in a hushed explanation of why exactly Naruto's feet were like little cannons and how whatever the hell he had just been doing wasn't going to work. The tired and drenched boy was combative today, at war with his stupid teacher and bad analogies. Tsunade and Shizune had stayed, thankfully, quiet and non-combative. When dealing with former teammates, non-combative constituted as a win. I was worried you wouldn't come, he said, flashing through hand signs until a small ball of flame leapt from his mouth and roared to life beneath the kindling. Tsunade recognized the old, heavily seasoned cast iron pan that Jiraiya produced from his pack as the same one they had used almost 2 decades prior while stuck in Cloud Country for 6 weeks in the mountains. She hoped he cleaned it. I'm here, she answered, leaning back and making great efforts to keep her body relaxed and voice open. So, let's talk. Jiraiya nodded, his eyes glued to the flame and trying to keep his own voice open and calm. After breakfast. I'll send the kid with Shizune and then you and I can talk. Tsunade nodded, sifting into the silence and pulling an apple from her own pocket to kill the time. For 20 minutes, the sun chased off the last of the night while Naruto crashed and swam out and crashed and swam out. It was repetitive and peaceful in an odd sort of way. The sun above was gentle, gliding against their skin and mixing with the smell of simmering eggs and morning wind. Jiraiya continued to cook. Naruto continued to fall. Tsunade and Shizune sat, taking it all in. When did, Tsunade said, gesturing vaguely to the commotion at the river. Naruto had managed to stay on 2 feet despite a third step that saw his leg sink to his knee. Unfortunately, the act of recovery was somehow more splashing and dramatic than just falling in would have been. This start, Jiraiya pushed his spoon against one of the strips of meat, earning a crackling sound accompanied by a hiss of steam. About a month ago, it was just training for the Chunin exams, but when this is over, it will be formal training for the next few years. Tsunade raised an eyebrow, opting to not focus on the definition of the word, this. You're taking another student. Full-time, Jiraya snorted. Teaching him will absolutely constitute a full-time job. His words were funny, but there was a strangled sound in his throat that sounded like pain. Shizune wasn't sure if he was joking or not, but whichever it was, she believed him. Tsunade said nothing, leaning on her arm and biting into her apple. Her eyes followed the cycle. Get up, fall, sink, swim out. Get up, fall, sink, swim out. How old is Naruto? Shizune interjected, pressing her hands together, watching the symmetry of the learning process. 13. Jiraiya replied, his head tilted as he crunched some mental math. Though he's coming up on 14 sometime in the near future, I think. You think? Tsunade circled the question like a vulture, clutching it in her talons of, none of this adds up, and leaving it out on a rock to dry. Jiraiya was mature, not rising to the provocation and keeping his focus wholly on the sizzle of newly added ham slices to the breakfast cooking. It was almost enough to cover the way his shoulders slumped like they'd been weighted down by rocks. So, Shizune continued, pushing past the silence and navigating away from the brewing conflict. He said he was a genin. Is he on a team? The tension in Jiraya's shoulders didn't release. If anything, it coiled and coiled until it twisted into the ground, and Shizune wondered if the man was about to jump up and take the boy and run. He was. Tsunade ed an eyebrow, taking another bite of her apple and looking ready to pounce. Was. He's my apprentice, now. Technically, he's not on a team. Jiraya's voice gave information without subtext. Robotic diplomacy with neither tone nor intonation, designed to state a fact and nothing more. He may as well have been telling them the color of the sky. Shizune could feel the wall, like a verbal barrier between truth and mystery. She tried knocking, again. What team was he on? Kakashi's. Tsunade's body straightened, the carefree posture of disinterest breaking while her eyes tracked Jiraya's face with a scowl. Does Hirsuen know about this? She asked, not even bothering to hide the incredulous tone behind her words. Jiraya's knuckles tightened around his spoon like a vice. He does. Jiraya replied, voice and jaw clenched so tight. We have had words. Tsunade's stare narrowed, a thin line drawing across her brow. Words. She remembered what it was like when Jiraya had words with someone. Having words for Jiraya was a thinly veiled code for we disagreed and came this close to kicking each other's teeth in over it. Jiraya and Hiruzen used to have words all the time. Teacher and student, flying off the handle back when they were just some hotshot kids playing war, and there were 500,000 things that could have turned Jiraya into a hair trigger standing on a landmine. When disagreements eventually devolved into words, the standard MO was screaming matches that became fist fights that they euphemistically dubbed heavy training. Heavy training very much had a style, and the plot could almost always summed by the same driving acts. Act 1, Jiraiya goes in angry and spitting fire, his words on his tongue and tingling in the knuckles of his fist. Act 1 ends, and Act 2 starts with punches that weren't pulled and training maneuvers that definitely don't fit the definition of friendly spar. Act 2 ends, and Jiraiya leaves the heavy training, bruised and fuming, storming off from whatever explosion had just occurred and going to find somewhere private where he could brood like he was Orochimaru. Act 3 was the resolution, Hiruzen emerging from words, looking completely unscathed but deeply unhappy and wondering why he puts up with these shit kids in the first place. Sensei never asked Tsunade or Orochimaru for comment on the incidents, and they never did. Jiraiya was the fire, and if they weren't the recipient of his words, they were wise enough as children to know they didn't want to be involved. Even if Hiruzen had asked for their comment, they sure as shit wouldn't have answered, anyway. Words. She repeated, the whole picture feeling fuzzier the more clarity she gained. Why had Jiraiya taken the boy? Pulling a ninja off an active team, Kakashi's team, without the express consent of the Hokage would certainly result in words, but there was more. Jiraiya said Kakashi's name like he wished he didn't know it. Even if she couldn't read Jiraya like the back of her own hand anymore, she could have felt the tension roiling beneath the sage's skin. Something was wrong in this picture. Very wrong. The kid? She asked, watching every uncoordinated splash like a hawk. How is he? Jiraya shrugged, eggs sizzling against the sounds of the flowing water. Depends on what you mean. Physically, he's a monster. Incoordinated and lacking anything that resembles finesse, but he's built like a tank and has stamina beyond anything I've ever seen. I think his chakra stores are bigger than mine and he's barely started puberty. Shizune hugged her knees with wide eyes in a growing concern. Tsunade's eyes narrowed. And his mental state? Jiraiya brought his head back and forth, weighing the right way to answer on his tongue. There's two sides. Loud, brash, obnoxious but harmless. Could stand to study and focus more than he does, but I'll be fixing that. He doesn't have a lot of friends, but he cares about the ones he has, like his whole life depends on it. A gust swept the riverbank and the cooking fire flickered. Flames whipped around the pan's edges and at the backside of Jiraya's hand. His dream is to be the Hokage. Tsunade made a sound that bubbled in her throat, thick and acrid and foul. She took another bite just to ease the taste. You've picked another fool, then. She concluded. Her eyes switched from camp to river with a dull sheen while Naruto tried and failed and tried and failed. And failed. And failed. He's not a fool. The slug princess scoffed. He's a fool and you're worse for enabling it. Tsunade's voice was a rope taut and fit to snap. She rounded on her teammate and her eyes pierced a hole straight through his chest and into his heart. Jiraiya met her gaze looking tired and ashamed, but his face was set as a stone and he wasn't budging. Shizune bounced between the two feeling like an ant. Lord Jiraiya, she interrupted, pushing her voice through the squabble. Both Sanin turned to her like they'd forgotten she was there. You mentioned that there were two sides to his mental state. Tsunade's gaze shifted back to the boy. Storming out of the river and standing again and again until he got it right. Like a fool. What was the other side? Jiraiya flipped one of the eggs, the yolk hissing as it hit the metal. His voice felt the same. Raw and burning. Do you remember those kids in AIM? Tsunade didn't realize she'd clenched her fist, but the apple in her hand plopped to the ground, cleaved in two with a resonating crack. Juice stained her fingers and trickled down her wrist as she rounded on her former teammate. No, she said, but it wasn't because she didn't remember. It was. No, because this wasn't supposed to happen. What was Jiraiya even implying? That Hiruzen and Kakashi had become Hanzo. That Konoha had fostered an environment where children were left on their own, living on the scraps of a city that rejected them. That was in any way similar. She could remember their faces like they were standing before her because they did. Every night when she closed her eyes and her dreams made their inevitable descent into nightmares. Dan and Nawaki weren't the only ghosts that haunted Tsunade's sleep, and she could see each of the AIM-3 standing before her, drenched and hungry. One with loud orange hair and even louder attitude. One quiet but with eyes that made her blood cold. One little girl caught between two forces of nature. Their eyes were big and their bodies were small and battered by the world and everything around them. Jiraiya had wanted to train them, obviously, resolving that if they could fight for themselves the war haunting them would be vanquished. Defeated like they were all knights fighting dragons and fairy tales were real. Orochimaru had been against, obviously, unmoved and unconcerned with another casualty in the war of man's hate in another village that wasn't his own. She was the one who had caved. One look from their eyes and she had crumbled like a sheet of paper and the coward she was inside. They're your responsibility. She'd said, turning her back but letting Jiraiya teach children how to fight in a war. She didn't even know where those kids were, but something in her gut rolled. She hoped their ends were swift and painless. Tsunade shook her head, willing the image from her mind with a mixture of brute strength and guilt. Never again. That hell was gone and buried, and the thought that anything like that was taking place in the world. That Konoha of all places would treat anyone, much less Minato's own son like. No. She refused. The slug princess looked to her teammate, eyes demanding any explanation that this wasn't the case. There were bags under Jiraya's eyes, but the whites were hot and hollow. She could hear the pitter-patter of raindrops in her ears. It sounded like a tidal wave. Aim, Shizune whispered to herself, not understanding the word and even more confused by the shell-shocked gaze the word prompted in her teacher. Tsunade rose with a force, shoving herself up and fixing a strand of blonde hair out of her eyes as she stormed from the camp in a silent march to the shoreline. Tsunade, Jiraya called, his eyes a warning that caught her like a net and anchor. Don't. Her footsteps stopped, heel crunching the earth beneath and her teeth grinding in her mouth. She tilted her head, eyes half-lidded and face weighed down by memories that felt like rain. Her lips twisted at the corners and turned down. Don't what, Jiraya? Don't fix his expectations now before your incessant enabling gets another child killed. Lady Tsunade, Shizune exclaimed, blindsided by the venom in her master's words. Jiraya's eyes darkened, but he made no effort to stop the Senju heiress as she marched towards the shore. Lord Jiraya, Shizune exclaimed because this wasn't making any sense and she was so tired of things not making sense. What was that? What is Lady Tsunade? Shizune rose to her feet and started walking after her master, but Jiraya's hand clasped around her wrist and rooted her to the spot. Let her go, he commanded. Shizune boggled. What? She hissed. Why? She's about to pick a fight with your student. She'll break him in half. She won't break him. A thoughtful expression crossed his face. She might smack him, a bit, but she won't break him. Shizune tried to meet Jiraya's gaze and understand because she wanted to understand why her teacher had gone from cold to inferno at the mere mention of a place. Was a single word all it took to uncork 10 years of bottle-up regret? Was it truly that easy? Jiraya's face held a trove of emotions as he met the young woman's gaze. She could see tired, regret, annoyance and shame and duty and anxiety swirling like a whirlpool stretched over aging skin. But there was one that stood out, a flicker of a thought arcing out beyond the rest and that filled Shizune's heart with something more heavy than the doubt swirling in her stomach. Shizune didn't know quite what it was, but it gave her enough pause to watch as her master approached the shoreline. Hey, brat, Tsunade roared, storming up to the riverbank with purpose in her stride and a sickness in her heart. Naruto wobbled, not expecting the outburst and crashing into the river from where he'd been attempting to stand. She strode across the water without hesitation, settling off the bank while Naruto crawled back onto shore. I almost had it, he groaned, golden hair shaking like a dog and water flying everywhere. Why'd you have to go and yell like that? Threw off my concentration. That was your concentration? No wonder you're struggling at this. Blue eyes narrowed and Naruto huffed a wet mop of hair out of his eyes so that this woman could witness the scathing glare he was sending her. What's that supposed to mean? He shot back. Tsunade made a noise that was 50% laugh, 50% scoff, and 100% pissing Naruto the hell off. Listen lady, I know you think you're some hot shot, Sanin. Naruto made air quotes around the word to accentuate the lack of shits he gave. But I'm trying to figure something out here. Either tell me you're coming back to fix the old man or leave me alone. She sneered, turning up her nose so as to better look down at the boy. Mouthy little brat, aren't you? Tsunade rolled her neck and Naruto could hear knuckles cracking in her hand. You think I'm going to let my student talk to you if you speak to me in that way? The water shimmered, but Naruto ignored it. He was preoccupied with trying to find a way to scowl harder. I'm here to get you back to fix the old man. Hearded. Jiraya's the one making deals with you and Shizune. She seems really nice but I didn't ask for that. I'm here to either finish the mission or train. The blonde leveled a serious glare, as serious as he could while wobbling back onto the water and attempting to find his footing. Either come back to Konoha or let me work. 1 step, 2 steps. Splash. Naruto gave a literal growl in frustration as he surfaced and heard Tsunade's condescending clicks. I don't know why you're trying too hard, she said, and her voice sounded so apathetic and so certain in the way it dismissed that Naruto smacked the water with his hand. What was that? You're a mess, you realize that? Tsunade continued, floating above the rippling water without a thought. We've been watching you fail water walking for 2 hours because your emotions are so volatile you couldn't control your chakra any more than you can control your emotions. Tsunade's head turned, glancing back to shore as she continued. I bet you can't even do the Haraishin right now, you're so all over the place. That is it. Naruto thrashed through the water, surging to the shore and pointing a finger back at the Sannin. I didn't ask for your help and I definitely didn't ask for your jerk comments. Did you just come here to pick a fight? I came here to give you much needed advice before you get yourself killed. She answered. A shinobi must be calm no matter what hardship they're going through. They must be collected, cold, and calculating. Tsunade's eyes leveled on the blonde, and Naruto was left with the distinct feeling he was being looked through, not at. A shinobi who can't contain their emotions will bring themselves nothing but death. Her words were hammers but her voice glass. Tsunade's heart pounded, memories pulling and tearing inside her chest. If you can't kill your emotions, you'll never make it as a shinobi. This life takes the foolish and give back only bodies. Naruto spit in response. Is that what you think, lady? He asked, voice dropping against the river's torrent. That's what's causing all of this. Just because you think all shinobi need to be huge, unfeelings. Talking about your home like it's a disease. Tsunade's face tilted and a shadow crossed over her eyes. Ripples of water pushed out from beneath her feet, little waves that rolled and crashed to shore at the blonde's feet. Maybe I am a little messed up right now, but you're wrong. Not every ninja has to be cold and heartless even when they're hit with something that's super shitty. A thought crossed the blonde's mind, his eyes sinking to the water below. I have a friend who thinks like you, and I think that might be the worst part of him. I refuse to be a ninja who doesn't have feelings. Yeah, the world can sometimes, but I'm not going to get stronger by cutting off my emotions and throwing them into a cage. Blue eyes stared up into Tsunade's own. Defiant. Unrelenting. When I'm Hokage, I'll show everyone how to be a ninja with heart. Tsunade's eyes widened, and she wasn't at the riverfront. She was standing in Konoha, right behind a little boy with sandy blonde hair smiling in the autumn sun. Tsunade brought her hand to her chest as her fingers twisted the crystal in her hands. Then, she heard explosions. Tsunade's hand gripped so hard around the crystal necklace her skin turned white. You're a fool, then. Her voice was forced and bitter. Heavy. That hat is a curse. Dreaming of that job will bring you nothing but pain and misery. Naruto audibly snarled, clenching wet fingers into wet fists and cheeks flushing red. Shut up, he mumbled. Tsunade ignored him. Give it up, now. She continued, because this saving was life. This was what stopping this cycle meant and damn it she was going to see it through. Save yourself the heartache and stop. I said shut up. The water rumbled. Little ripples from the shore where Naruto stood. She doubted the boy realized he was the one making them. The Hokage protects the village. He grit. His breath was hot and ragged and he could feel a tinge of red pulsing at the corners of his cheeks that swelled across his face. I get that you don't like the Hokage. Whatever. But if you ever talk bad about the Hokage again, I'll kick your whether you're a Sannin or not. Naruto glared with a righteous furor. Tsunade met the gaze with something that wasn't fury, but if emotions were heat the water beneath her would be boiling. You couldn't lay a finger on me if you tried, brat. She replied, waving a single finger before the boy's face and accentuating that the lone, painted digit would be all she needed to smash Naruto's head into the ground and knock the fool out of him. Why did she always have to beat lessons into these kids? Why did they insist on arguing against her? Oh, well, better a bruised ego than a bleeding corpse. Give up on being the Hokage. Go and live your life and be free of the nonsense you're chasing. What the hell is your problem, Granny? My problem is idiots like you. The words came out so hot and so fast Naruto had to take a small step back. Tsunade's aura surged, whipping dirt and dust and 20 years of hurt into the air around them. You're completely blind to the death race you're running because you're young and a fool. But this isn't a fairy tale. That's not how this story ends. You won't become Hokage because no one who dreams of becoming Hokage gets what they want. They suffer and die, and all this blind zealotry Jiraiya and Konoha are feeding you is just going to get you killed. Naruto could feel the heat rising in his chest, like pistons shifting into a new gear that ran low but so much hotter. Oh, I get it, he said, finally understanding and sinking back into his stance. You didn't come out here to give me advice or set me on the right path. You don't even hate the Hokage. Naruto leaned his neck back, eyes looking down and looking right back through. You're just a coward. Tsunade twitched, voice low and oh so dangerous. What did you just say? You heard me. You don't think all that shit. You're just scared and hiding behind your bullshit words. Choose your next words. Tsunade's breath was jagged, little daggers masquerading as words. Very, very carefully. I'm going to be Hokage. Naruto said, slow and certain. And you're willing to bet your life on it? Absolutely. Naruto shot back. You wanna bet me? Tsunade's lips turned, a dark and heavy laughter finding its way out of her throat. Bet you? She shot back. I bet you couldn't lay a single finger on me right here and now. I'd slap you away with a single finger. Yeah, okay. Bet. Fighting words. Those were definitely fighting words. Naruto had plenty of fighting words. So many fighting words he could write a book on fighting words. He knew just what to say to put arrogant, know-it-all old grannies who don't know shit about shit in their place. In fact, he knew his 4 favorite fighting words by heart. Kage Bushin no Jutsu. There was an explosion of smoke on the riverbank. It cleared in the wind and 6 perfect clones emerged. They snarled. Talk shit, get hit. The clones yelled in unison, breaking into formation and surging towards Tsunade. A clone sprinted left, trying to burst out over the river. Its paces were quick and steady as it burst out over the water, but a single uneven chakra surge sent it crashing into the depths with a poof. Tsunade raised a taunting eyebrow. Needs work, she reviewed. All 5 remaining Naruto's glared daggers. Who needs water walking? The furthest left yelled back, grabbing its nearest copy and spinning on his heels like a discus. When you can take the fight to you. The clone released, and another Naruto soared over the water at breakneck speed. Tsunade had to give it to the kid, using yourself as a weapon was constituted as quick thinking. But as the Naruto approached, the blonde Sannin shifted, shoulders rolling. The confused projectile careened right by her, missing to the right. It gave a gurgled cry as it sailed past its target, splashing into the water and disappearing in smoke. Not good enough. Tsunade corrected, taking a quiet step towards the shore. You miss and you've got nowhere to go. Another mistake. The Narutos saw a collective red, and 2 more clones yelled, flying out with the same strategy and poofing away with the same undignified grace as the clones before. It appears stubborn as a trait you and Jiraiya share. Tsunade noted, rising to her full height as the clones fizzled into the water. Of the 3 blondes remaining, a different profanity from each. You can't even make it out here to fight me, kid. She taunted, taking another step back onto the river and waving her arms wide. This is a favor, you have to wake up and accept reality. Reality, the prime Naruto growled through grit teeth. Has been shitty enough, lately. Tsunade could almost hear the cogs whirling inside the blonde's mind, creaking and rusted but moving. The 2 remaining clones grabbed each other's hands, dashing towards the shore as chakra surged beneath their feet. Sandals hit the water and chakra flared like a rocket. It was far, far too much chakra to steadily balance on the water, more akin to a fire hose than the delicate balance required. 1 clone began to wobble, the second followed, but then, Tsunade's eyes widened. Twin Narutos, leaning on each other and brute forcing their chakra into the water beneath them. Each screamed, a battle cry as they surged forward. Sprays of river water erupted behind their feet, nothing but brute force and opposing physics keeping them afloat. It was so stupid, it was genius. Credit was due, but Tsunade wasn't in the mood for credit. Creative thinking didn't change things. The sound of rain and distant explosions rang in her ears and her eyes glazed. Reaching down to the water with a single finger, Tsunade raked her arm across the water. The charging Narutos gaped, blindsided as a wall of water erupted from the woman's movement. Their precarious stance leaving them unable to turn, the remaining clones impacted the wall with a smack and disappeared beneath the tsunami. No more tricks, kid. Tsunade said, turning back to where the final Naruto had stood. This is for your own good. The final Naruto swallowed, bowing up to his full height and facing his enemy with more presence than a child should have. How about people stop telling me what's good for me? Tsunade blinked, and the Naruto on shore disappeared in a pop of smoke. 20 meters downriver, a blonde blur drenched and swimming with all his might against the current pushed with his legs and forced his torso out of the water, his left arm ed. The kunai left the blonde's hand like a missile, whistling through the air across the water until it was half a meter from Tsunade's face. Her hands blurred, moving to grab the kunai because she was a Sannin, of course she could catch a kunai in midair. Naruto grinned. Perfect. That's what he was hoping for. He curled in the water, letting go of his surroundings and compressing his chakra into his gut. Let the river move him, focusing only in his mind for the connection. Tsunade's hand made contact, the metal missile captured against her grip. As the water pushed him further downstream, his lips stretched into a thin, determined line. Lay a hand on this, Granny. He thought, feeling the connection in his mind and pooling his entire being. He let loose his spatial awareness and felt himself slip into the summon in a yellow swirl and CRRRKK. There was no yellow flash. No connection. Naruto floundered, bobbing up from the water and looking to the kunai and its holder in disbelief. What? Tsunade looked to the cracked blade in her hands with a mild interest. Huh, she muttered, turning the metal in her fingers and twisting it around her wrist with a careless flourish. I didn't think you had the control. You actually would have been able to jump. You'd have been right here. She held her hand out, touching the air where there was no yellow and no flash. Naruto could only stare. How? He whispered. Tsunade extended her hand, the curving seal of the Hiraishin's hilt visible in her outstretched palm. You think I don't know this seal? She called out. Tsunade twisted, moving the blade by its metal and swinging the seal-marked handle in the air before lobbing it with an underhand toss back to the shore where Naruto was crawling out of the water. It clanged to the ground at Naruto's feet. If you think this seal is magic, you're not just wrong, you'll be dead. How many times do you think I've destroyed seals like this one? Explosive tags. Genjutsu traps. Did you think no one would be able to deactivate just some ink and chakra? Ink and chakra. Her words pounded, battering rams to his worldview as he looked at the smeared symbols. It doesn't matter how special the Hiraishin is, it's all just ink and chakra. Naruto bent down, reverently pulling the discarded kunai from the ground. His fingers were numb, tracing loose circles around the hilt's designs. The blackened markings inked across the handle were faded, a cracked smudge pushing the print and twisting around the blade. Intricate brushwork brought asunder. When Naruto reached out with his chakra, the kunai was as lifeless as a nearby rock. You don't know the first brushstroke to create that seal. You're a one-trick pony who doesn't even know his trick. Her eyes flared. Naruto swallowed, realization dawning. My trick, however, it was too late. Naruto looked up, but it only gave him time to see a blonde and green blur appear to his side. Water exploded behind her footsteps. She was no yellow flash, but Naruto couldn't follow her movements all the same. A force pushed against his body, a single point, as promised, but it hit like a thunderstorm. His chest crumpled, the impact ramming into his body and rattling in his bones. One moment, he was standing. The next, he was flying like a rag doll to the center of the river. He smacked the water like a stone and skipped twice before plunging into the water below. Was that necessary? Jiraya asked, voice appearing from the air as he shuffled behind her. Tsunade made a clicking noise with her tongue and expressed no remorse. It's for his own good, she said, because it wasn't she would know. Jiraya shook his head. You won't break him, Tsunade scoffed, rolling her neck with a small crack. Or what? I'll answer to you. The edge in her voice was a knife balanced on the precipice of conviction and exhaustion. How many years had they done this? Thinking they could play gods and build a future only to have reality and death rip and tear away at everything. The way Jiraiya was clinging to this, recklessly filling a child's head with lies in pursuit of what? The will of fire. Not me, Jiraiya answered. You won't break him because he won't be broken. I told you, Naruto is special. Tsunade's foot slammed, a surge of chakra pulverizing the rock beneath her heel as her face went dark. Special, she hissed. How many others have been special? How many fools will you march down this path? You and Hiruzen and every Hokage before you, marching like zealots down a path, and you know damn well the only outcome is death. Both ninja turned as Naruto burst back from against the rapids. His arms flailed, yelling loudly about how that was a cheap shot, and no fair, as he furiously pushed against the current. Tsunade watched as the blonde drifted back to shore, aided up by Shizune, who had rushed over to engage in what she could only ume was standard, post-Tsunade, triage. Do you want more dead bodies? Tsunade continued, raw and low and very clearly hating the empty feeling currently coiling inside her stomach. If you don't break those delusions, he'll wind up just like them. She turned to Jiraiya and her eyes were hot. Guilt was a heavy weight and it pressed into Jiraiya's heart with every breath he took under her gaze. But he knew that road, too. Tsunade wasn't the only ninja haunted by the mirror, and Jiraiya had more than enough skeletons in his moral conscience to meet her accusation with unflinching resolve. I'm not building delusions, Tsunade. This time is different. How? She snapped. Her fists were shaking and she looked ready to reduce everything around her to powder out of shame and frustration. How could you possibly know this will be different? It was a fair question, more than fair. He'd been asking himself the same thing over and over for the past month. Jiraiya would have given anything to have not known the answer, but after sleepless nights the words came with a quick and heavy ease.